Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the September 9th Oregon Education Investment Board. Reminder that we are streaming this meeting as well, and we were starting right at 1 o'clock. So Seth, if you could start with roll call.
Governor Kitzhaber. Julia Bream Edwards.
Present.
Yvonne Curtis.
Here.
Matthew Donegan.
Present.
Samuel Henry.
Present.
Nicole June Maher.
Present.
Mark Mobihill.
Here.
David Reeves.
Here.
Ron Sexton.
Here.
Mary Spildy. Kay Turan. Hannah Vendry.
Here.
Dick Withnell. Here.
Thank you. We have a lot of interesting agenda items coming up and looking forward to this meeting. Some pretty significant decisions as well. If you'll notice, we have some action items that we will be addressing. But we will start out with item number 2, the Chief Education Officer update. Nancy, you're on.
Thank you. There's Matt. I want to begin by welcoming back Matt Donegan. And I think you know that Matt has been on leave with the OEIB because he's been doing incredibly hard in leadership work in higher ed and decided that to really contribute the way he wanted to the both boards that he really needed to focus on one. So we've been meeting and he's really excited to be back, and I really appreciate the expertise you're going to bring to the board. So welcome back. Appreciate that.
Did he bring a note from home?
So in addition, I wanted to talk a little bit, I wanted you all to notice we're in Portland, and why that's important is you did give us feedback about having meetings in Portland, so we will be doing that with only 2 exceptions. The first one is during the legislative session. We will probably need to be meeting in Salem. And the second one is if, in order to get the governor to be part of our meetings, his schedule makes it so we need to be in Salem. I know we all value him being here and being able to chair the committee. So those would be the 2 exceptions. In addition, I know you were all interested in knowing my schedule so that you could decide whether you wanted to join some of the multiple meetings I get to go to. And we've heard back from 2 of the board members already. So Samuel's going to join me in the Equity Opportunities Dinner on October 7th. And Mark Milvahill is going to be part of the presentation that we're doing on 3rd grade reading proficiency at the OSBA board. So if any of the rest of you want to join me or any other people from OEIB and events, we love to have you. In addition, I wanted you to know that we continue to work on the website. Our goal with the website is that material is easily accessible to the board and also to the community. We want to be transparent. We want to know what people know where things are. So we do have a link on the front page now that allows you to know about meetings, materials for meetings, particularly the OEIB meetings. And in the future, we're going to make sure we have even more information about all the meetings that go on related to education and related to the OEIB. So do know that working on the website is a continuous progress, and we take it very seriously because we want people to be able to access information. In addition to that, you should have received from us, I think it was Dr. Henry, who asked us for information on dual credit. And we did, a lot of this we'll just provide to you between meetings so you can have it and read it. But as I read the research, I thought it was worth just pointing 2 of many of the things out that the research said. The first thing that it says is that students who do dual credit have higher participation in higher ed. We think that's really important because we are a birth through college and career organization. And then in addition to that, for students who had dual credit in high school, finished their freshman year, and started their sophomore year, they had a higher GPA than students who didn't receive dual credit. So we're really pleased that we have the Accelerated Learning Committee that's doing a lot of work to make sure that dual credit is an opportunity for our students in high school. So, and I know there's lots of other good reading to do in that research review.
Thank you. Any questions for Nancy? Comments? Sammy?
I would like to acknowledge the report and also the wonderful work that Dr. Roselli has done with it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. We'll move on to item number 3, the Early Reading Initiative, and we have Kristen Gimbel presenting, our Communication Director. Welcome.
Thank you. Chair Mulvihill, members of the OEIB. For the record, my name is Kristen Gimbel. I'm the Communications Director for Dr. Golden and the OEIB, and I'm really thrilled to be here today to present an update to all of you on the work that we've been doing with regards to the statewide literacy campaign. As many of you know, the Oregon legislature, through a series of strategic investments in the last biennium, charged the Oregon Education Investment Board with leading a statewide literacy campaign. Through that charge, I'm going to delete the PowerPoint. There we go. Through that charge, we've broken down the work into 3 key objectives to really guide and frame how we would prioritize and focus the work. So ensuring that the literacy campaign aligns with all the existing investments and initiatives from birth to 3rd grade, to really, of course, build awareness for the importance of early literacy, and then to galvanize Oregonians across the state to help support families and students in reaching that really important 3rd grade benchmark. As we think about aligning with existing 3rd grade reading efforts, of course, we all know that currently students, as of 2013 data, are reading at about 68% proficiency rate. We also know that there are a handful of statewide strategies and investments in place to really address that gap between our students. And so the campaign is designed to complement all of those strategies and investments in ways that are really community and family-centric and are about collective impact for each of our individual communities. Our approach is about focusing on families. It's about unlocking the potential of families to play a key role in supporting literacy building. It's about engaging deeply with families who we know face myriad barriers to helping support their children in building literacy. It's about meeting families where they are and empowering parents to bring skill building into their homes and into their daily lives, and ultimately developing strategies for communities to really come together to, again, collectively impact this important benchmark. So I wanted to share a little bit about the theory of impact. Ultimately, given the size of the investment from the legislature and the amount of learning we really felt like we needed to do to be able to better understand what some of these barriers are and how we could tailor communication and engagement to better help families overcome them, ultimately the strategy was to select 5 focus communities, or select a group of focus communities that we could really, again, engage with deeply to better learn and understand. What are some of the barriers? What's working well? How could your community and your state better help you as parents in supporting your children? So through engaging with each of those focus communities, really understand, again, how we can communicate and engage differently to overcome some of those barriers, to support parents in overcoming some of those barriers. And the theory was that within each of the communities, we could then help facilitate and support these communities in developing locally driven projects that could be specific to that community, could be about sort of culturally specific engagement practices, could be about addressing some isolation issues in our rural communities, sort of small projects that could help support the communications and engagement strategies that we were working on. Now, I'll tell you that over the course of engaging with these focus communities, one of the things that became pretty apparent was that the needs in these communities weren't about sort of little band-aids and small projects that could be about aligning partners, but that, as all of you likely know, they ran much deeper than that. And so for some, communications and engagement wasn't going to be enough. Sort of providing a difference in the way that we communicate or in the way that we engage wasn't going to really move the needle and effectively support the momentum that we knew we needed in each of these communities. And that's where the OEIB leaned on some partners to sort of think about how we can augment some communication and engagement strategies with real impactful sort of infrastructure building. And so I'll give you an example. In one of our communities where we know the barriers are high, we know that isolation is high, we know that there's a highly diverse family population, they had recently submitted a hub application and weren't quite ready to be able to move forward with the hub process. And so through conversations with our early learning team, with some of our regional solutions team, and with some of the governor's staff, there's going to be a grant that was inspired through some of these conversations going to that community where they'll be focusing on some of the things that I'll share later with this campaign as a building block to get them closer to being ready to be a hub. And so creating a specific project to really rally the community around that can help connect and link to some of the existing strategies at the state level. We've also been working to unlock some of the early literacy grant dollars and think about how we can connect the dots here. And then finally, through the Poverty to Prosperity Initiative, one of our communities is being looked at as an Oregon Solutions project to, again, really create the infrastructure and the backbone to really seed the foundation for some of this important work. And then the final piece in terms of theory of impact, the strategy is really thinking about how some of the learnings through this work can ultimately down the road inform state investments and policy recommendations. So how did we select the focus communities? What you'll see up on the screen is a series of icons that are designated by a county throughout the state of Oregon. What we wanted to do is look at communities who we really felt could stand to gain substantially from a really focused effort in their individual community around literacy building. And so we looked at myriad data points, and the icons are really just symbolic to sort of share with you the sort of mapping exercise that we did. But we looked at things that you would assume, kindergarten assessment scores, reading data scores. But we also looked at Department of Health and Human Services data that showed where do we have the highest concentration of children at risk ages 0 to 6? Where do we have the highest concentration of communities of color? Where do we have the highest concentration of languages other than English being spoken? Where do we have high unemployment rates, high tribal communities? And then we also looked at where are there existing collaborations from a regional standpoint? Where are our RACs? Where are our hubs? Where are our STEM hubs? So we could think about where might there be opportunities to build on some of the existing momentum and support some of the communities who we know have the most significant barriers to reading proficiently by 3rd grade.
Kristen, that map was pretty compelling to me, and I think that is something the stakeholders would like to see as well. I mean, when I look at the various initiatives around the state, this is the first time I've seen, who's a RAC, who's a hub, what are the configurations all on one. I think that has a lot of potential for outreach.
I'd be happy to share, and we have a series of probably 20 maps that we've plotted in myriad ways that I'd be more than happy to make available to anyone who's interested.
Could you share with us the legend?
I can. I don't have it with me now. I sort of verbally went through the highlights.
I missed the key here.
I'm sorry.
Like what
I'm
an
sorry.
R stands for.
I did not include that in.
Can you just tell us what it is?
Sure.
Again?
So R would be RAC, S would be STEM Hub, K through 12 would be low low reading scores. KE is kindergarten assessment. H is one of our hubs. So I apologize for not including that, but I'd be more than happy to include that as a follow-up.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Having recently gone through very similar process around education outcomes, it's very
I'm looking at it too.
It's misleading to.
Yeah, you need to ask that.
Let me address that, Nicole, I'm sorry. Excuse me, whoever's on the phone, if you could mute
What?
that. if you could mute.
Yeah, exactly.
Help, Seth. I don't know if they're... Go ahead, Nicole.
Just by combining data from a county perspective, it really tells some misleading stories. For example, Washington County is one of the largest, most diverse child populations and actually has several of the schools with some of the poorest reading scores, yet if you aggregate all the schools together, you completely lose the story of Washington County. I could reference many other counties here, and so I just get really concerned about missing large populations of children in great need by organizing it in the county. I understand the need for it, but I would just encourage you all to keep an eye out for that.
I appreciate that. And as you'll see as we go through, this is really just one lens that we've looked at to sort of think about how we could identify focus communities. What I'll share on the next slide is the communities that we ended up selecting. And again, they were selected based on the myriad barriers that we know exist in these communities, also due to certainly regional diversity. We wanted to make sure that this project really spanned the state of Oregon. There were a couple of communities that we initially selected who came back and said, you know what, we're at initiative fatigue. We just got a rack, we just got a hub or a STEM hub, and as thrilled as we are to be selected, it's not something we can take on. And so that's also reflected here in who's selected. We also wanted to make sure that the groups selected were really representative of a broad spectrum of populations within Oregon, so that we were really able to learn and better understand across myriad groups. So from our ESL communities to our communities of color to our tribal communities, migrant communities, and certainly the rural and urban divide as well. As you'll see here, these are identified by counties, and then there's also some stars in there which are specific communities where we'll be focusing for the purposes of the work with these focus communities. And then here are, just in a bit of an easier format, by county, and then again, the sort of specific groups that we'll be focusing on for the purposes of the campaign. So between April and June of this year, we did some deep engagement with each of these communities, went several times to visit communities, had conversations in small group fashions, 10 to 20 individuals in a group. We had separate parent groups. In many cases, we had more than one group and had them in bilingual fashion. As was the case in the Reynolds School District, we had 4 languages being spoken at once in one of our engagement sessions with parents. And then separately, we met with community partners, and I'm defining that very broadly, ranging from education leaders to library leaders to nonprofits and culturally specific organizations in each of these communities, tribal communities, and then other literacy stakeholders. I also want to add that as part of our sort of thinking and planning for this campaign, we engaged a handful of key statewide partners, again, with the intention of really making this campaign knit together all of the strategies from birth to 3rd grade that are preparing Oregon to hit that important 3rd grade benchmark. So I've listed a handful of them here. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list, but just wanted to give you a sense of the degree to which we've been integrating. This has really been about aligning initiatives and perspectives, and also about creating a feedback loop. So as much as the campaign benefited from the initiatives and perspectives from this group, it was about sharing back with the individuals in this group so that we could really inform some of the work that they were doing based on what we learned. I want to share some of the themes that came up in our focus communities, and they're up on the screen. I won't go through all of them, but I will highlight a handful of them, many of which probably won't be surprising to many of you. Parents want their children to be successful. For many parents, they don't necessarily know how to do that or don't understand the role that they can play in really making their children successful. We found a host of misperceptions among parents, really driven by, in some cases, culture, in some cases, family upbringing. Things like reading or education only occurs at school. The teacher is really the authority when it comes to education, and the parents don't have much of a role. That reading should be done in English in order to be beneficial. We also heard about the barriers that exist to existing literacy programs, such as transportation or access due to the hours of operation, say for a library or a program happening in one of our communities. There was confusion about what kinds of literacy activities are okay. Is a comic book okay? Is reading sports stats and figures, is that okay? Does that count? And then certainly for our families in poverty or struggling with any number of basic needs, reading and sort of literacy building took a back seat. And so it was through these themes, which I've highlighted here, and certainly there are many others, that really drove the foundational principles that we used to think about how we could design communication and engagement regarding literacy differently. So notions like building literacy has to feel easy. It has to convey some sort of inclusion into daily life in ways that meets parents where they are. Simply telling families that reading is important is not enough. We have to really empower parents to be their child's first and best teacher and really convey that reading isn't exclusive to picking up a book and that it can be done in multiple languages. Really needing to connect reading to the promise of a fulfilling future. And then finally, to really ensure that we're demonstrating both cultural and regional relevance in however we communicate and plan to engage with families across the state. And so that really drove this very simplistic look at campaign values, which is about putting families and students in the center. It's about creating ease, ensuring that whatever we come up with is easy to understand and easy to do. Committing to it being accessible. So whether that's about access to technology or access to a location or access to low literacy individuals or individuals who speak multiple languages or for whom English is not their first language. It has to be relevant. It has to be, again, both culturally and regionally relevant. And then finally, the anchor down at the bottom is about support, because we all know that reading proficiently and getting students on the path to success doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are all kinds of family stabilization supports that are really critical in order for families to be able to focus on things like literacy building skills. So it was these values that drove the creation of the campaign name, logo, tagline, and messaging and engagement tools. And with that, I present Storytime. Storytime is about conveying ease and accessibility in everyday life. It's about saying every day, everywhere, there are opportunities that fit into who you are, what you're doing, and where you're going, that you can help support your child or children. But the name and the tagline translate well into multiple languages. Certainly the notion of storytelling is something that is central to many of our cultures around the state. And the emphasis on the OR in the middle really emphasizes and localizes this campaign to Oregon. The colors in the logo were determined by asking families in all of our focus communities, what colors do you think about when you think of family, fun, adventure, culture? And we also looked at a composite of more than 100 logos of both state and national reading initiatives and others that were culturally specific, and tried to look at where there was some overlap in terms of colors, how we could even down to the color think about this logo really being appealing and applicable, relevant to many of our communities and cultures across the state. Storytime is really intended to approach communication differently. It's about empowering parents to use myriad ways to support their children that can be incorporated in everyday life, easily fit into busy schedules, allow for low literacy levels, and encourage teaching in multiple languages. We'll use Storytime to debunk traditional notions of reading as being limited to a book, and instead convey the many research-validated ways that can complement reading and involve grandparents, older siblings, other family members in easy ways to support literacy building in everyday life. I've included this because I wanted to share this very sort of overt notion around play, talk, read, and sing. You'll notice at the bottom there's icons that we've included. They won't typically be paired with the logo, but it is something that we developed that is, again, really accessible to low literacy audiences, easily transferable in multiple languages, and really overtly conveys that there are multiple ways to support and empower parents in reading and literacy building with their children. I believe that the power of the Storytime campaign is that it was really designed, again, to resonate, to connect and empower with our families who we know are in that 32% gap. But it is also accessible, simple, and intended to be fun so that it really appeals and can connect with families across the state. One of the other components that we put together as part of the campaign is key messages. I've really just sort of added some splices of them here. These will not be in this format, but I wanted to give you a flavor of sort of the categories, the different groups that we'll be working on key messages for. These have been tested with our focus communities. We went back and engaged with them a second time. They've also been the full list, which will be available, has also been tested with many of our statewide partners and community organizations working with students and families. There will also be a whole host of additional information on the campaign that we've created.
You're showing perseverance.
Yes, that's right. I wanted to share, really dive into the key storytime strategies here and sort of break them down one by one and give you some examples of what we mean by each of these categories. So owning local is about creating a sense of ownership, a sense of urgency at the community level to really drive collective impact to support this super critical third grade reading benchmark. So in our focus communities, one of the things we'll be doing is creating, or one of the things we have done is create a custom logo that parents and community leaders in that community have helped create and inspire. So they've given input on iconic symbols, places, imagery that means something to them. And when I say mean something to them, means something to them collectively. So bringing together a diverse group from each of these communities and helping them to create a logo that can be something that really resonates with them. We'll be unveiling each of these logos in launch events in each of our focus communities between October 2nd and November 12th. We'll absolutely be inviting all of you as board members, and I've included some information on when those events are on the table with the resources in case anyone else is interested. At the state level, we'll also be creating a host of vehicles and strategies for communities to take ownership as well at the local level. So we'll be creating some customizable materials for partners, businesses, and organizations to really use. This is one example here of a customizable card, or call it a bookmark if you like. Again, this really illustrates not just telling parents that these play, talk, sing, and read notions can be beneficial, but actually playfully creating some opportunities and prompts that parents can use. And you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, the yellow circles are about adding local logos. So whether it's a library or a culturally specific organization or a nonprofit, they can add some ownership around adding their logo here. These will all be created in Word documents so that they're incredibly accessible no matter what kind of technology platforms any of our communities might be working with. The second category here is about building awareness. And this is really about how do we create awareness for the connection of reading at third grade to lifelong success? And how do we build awareness for the ease of literacy building every day and everywhere? How can this be part of debunking some of those perceived barriers, real and perceived barriers that parents have when they think about potentially supporting their students? So here's another example of a poster that can be locally customizable. Again, the white space at the bottom is all about sort of adding local information. This is about spelling out play, talk, sing, and read, and why they can be beneficial in building important skills for students that can ultimately help with lifelong success. Again, all intended to be very simplistic, easily translatable into multiple languages, and highly accessible for low literacy audiences given the symbols. The next strategy is about creating access and engagement. I'm going to focus specifically on engagement here and break it up into two key components. So the first piece is really about how do we create engagement within communities around the state. So if what we're wanting is collective impact, how do we create vehicles to not only engage communities, but allow them to show publicly that commitment to be engaged? And so what we created was this concept of take the Storytime Pledge. And this is the first part of it. The second part of the pledge is customizable based on who the audience is. So we've created pledges that are specific to parents, specific to community organizations and culturally specific organizations, business owners, community members, libraries, educators, policymakers. I'm adding a handful here. Each of these individual groups have a series of pledge ideas that they can do if they're going to take the pledge. What I've outlined here is some of those that are unique, some of those that you don't typically see as part of some of the ways that we extend and offer support for any of these individual groups. So for example, in the libraries, it's about librarian taking the pledge to think creatively about bringing library programs into families who might be isolated or unable to get to the library. Thinking about as a community service provider, how that group can commit to finding ways to accessing some of our hard to reach families. So really being overt about how are we collectively connecting with many of these families who we know currently have barriers to being able to access some of these services and supports. In each of the focus communities, we'll be creating an opportunity for attendees, all attendees who will be comprised of many on this list and others, to publicly take the pledge. There will also be a campaign website whereby individuals from across the state can commit to taking the pledge. We'll be creating some functionality where we can sort based on the individual group. We can sort by location. So as a state, we can get a sense of where some of the momentum is starting to build around commitment for this important work, and how we might be able to leverage some of those commitments that have been made by many of the individuals on this list and others to really drive further momentum around community-driven support for third grade reading. The second piece of engagement is thinking about how do we engage our families in a way that is effective and relevant. And so this piece is about, again, how do we engage the parents who aren't currently engaged? How do we find different ways to connect with them? How do we create a menu of options that meet them where they are and allow them to plug in as it makes sense for them? So the first tactic is about going to them. So what are some of the existing programs and partnerships in communities throughout the state that are already connecting with parents? Home health, case management services, a trusted community leader who's already going into the home. So how can we create some strategic partnerships with those entities to really bring some of this information, some of the engagement tools that we're working on through the campaign to our families who might not get it in another way? How can we reach families where they're already going? Grocery stores, laundromat, a church or community center, a restaurant. We're working on tools such as an activity sheet that, again, will be translated into multiple languages, that's been developed in deep partnership with communities around the state and many of our statewide early learning partners around what are some of those activities that would be fun to engage parents with their children that sort of span the spectrum from creating a riddle to telling a story to prompts that foster sort of that conversation between parents and their children that we know build important literacy skills. And then the final piece is about providing immediate access. How do we find strategies that ensure that wherever, whenever parents are interested in engaging with this kind of work and learning more, there's a 24-hour, 7 days a week opportunity to do that. Now, most often this is connected to technology, and one of the things we want to be really careful with is knowing that in many parts of the state, access to a computer, access to internet is a barrier. One of the things that we heard through engaging with our communities, though, is that almost without exception, parents and partners said mobile phones, smartphones, are the way that they communicate and share information. And so one of the things that we're exploring, both in the communities and with many of our partners at the state level, is what would that look like? What are some of the best practices out there and sort of research-based solutions that can be mobile forward and that can really bring some of these learnings, some of the activities to parents where they are? We also heard quite a bit that more than any other group, parents listen to other parents when they're thinking about what can I do to best support my child? And so how do we leverage that? How do we create some shared community and conversation for parents within their own community to be able to share some of the things that they're doing? And this could be certainly a way to do just that. And the final piece is about evaluating, refining, and replicating. How do we know that the focus work in our focus communities has been effective? And how can we use what we've learned about engaging differently, about bringing different families and different organizations into the fold in ways that we aren't currently, to really inform how we think about investments and policy and other decisions moving forward. So I'm sharing here some of the short-term campaign goals, naturally increasing awareness and engagement. Again, this is about connecting the literacy building with lifelong success and ensuring that it's really clear that it can be easy. The second piece, again, engagement. It's about engaging communities in this collective impact strategy to really take it upon themselves to start to move the needle around this important third grade benchmark. And then, of course, long-term campaign goals, which the ultimate is to really ensure that each and every child have literacy-rich environments and they're reading proficiently by third grade. So I wanted to share, as I wrap up here, a couple of quick sort of overviews of the experience at a couple of different levels. So in our focus communities, we've talked about a little bit about the community-driven projects that each of our focus communities will see. Some of them will be small and some of them will be supported by outside partnerships and investments. A custom Storytime logo that's really inspired by that community, allowing them to create some local ownership. Launch events in each of these communities that are designed to really build momentum, bring the community together. We'll be creating family-centric videos with family members in each of these communities. The videos will be shot ensuring that we're featuring multiple languages, that we're including our tribal communities, that through the videos we're showcasing a broad spectrum of ways that are regionally and culturally specific for families to be able to support their children. So, for example, in one of the conversations we had down in Klamath, one of the opportunities that the tribe came up with there was, why not showcase berry picking, something really central to something that our families do, and why not showcase that as an opportunity to really build literacy skills? And what if we were to shoot a video about parents engaging with their children in that activity and really connect the dots for the tribal community and the parents around how literacy and culture and education and culture can really come together? And we'll be doing similar community-driven and inspired videos throughout each of our focus communities. And again, really aligning with all of the statewide efforts and the regional efforts to ensure that we are leveraging and maximizing momentum and impact. And then at the statewide level, we'll be creating a campaign website. It'll be launching on September 30th. And one of the things I just wanted to note that hasn't come up in the presentation so far, as part of sort of the lead up of this campaign, Governor Kitzhaber had a conversation with Ray Davis, who's the CEO of Umpqua Bank. They really wanted to contribute in some way to the governor's education vision. And after sort of sharing a menu of options, this was the place that they really wanted to support. And so one of the components of the website will be a book donation portal where individual community members can select to send a book to their local elementary school. Umpqua will be matching each of those books and donations of up to $50,000. And we'll be asking that each of the districts allow the children to select the books so that it's something that they will be able to relate to and engage with, and then importantly that they'll take that home as well. Again, at the website, we'll be able to have community partners from across the state download many of the materials I've shared today, as well as a host of key messages and other resources. We'll have those videos that I referenced available for download and sharing through multiple platforms. And then we'll have the opportunity to take the literacy pledge for individuals across the state. So in terms of next steps, we'll be launching the campaign through the focus communities October 2nd through November 12th. Concurrently, through the launch of the website, we'll be launching at the statewide level. We'll be certainly participating in ongoing evaluation and refinement. And then phase 2, as resources and capacity allow, will be about thinking, how can we extend these learnings to an additional statewide reach? How can we deepen some of the partnerships with our philanthropic entities, with our community organizations, and with our regional partnerships that we have established? And then how do we think about possibly adding additional focus communities who could really stand to gain substantially from a focused effort? And with that, I will take any clarifying questions, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Kristen. We have about 3 to 4 minutes for questions, comments.
Go ahead.
Anna?
Chris, your focus was impeccable.
Thank
Through
you.
all of the interruptions, you did great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing this. Just as we look at rolling this out and the work we're going to do, is there anything around librarians and the impact that they have on student learning and reading in our schools? Because that's one of the things that we've seen cut in many districts. And I'm just wondering what's the research out there around librarians and what can we do to help in that area?
It's a good question. I don't know specific research off the top of my head, but I can say that through the planning and through our strategic thinking about rolling this out, the librarians throughout the state are really an integral part of that. We've been working really closely with Mary Kay Dahlgren, who's the head of the State Library Association, and many of her colleagues to think about how this could be incorporated in some of the existing plans within our libraries.
So in our K-12 schools, the students are coming and there's not a library. There may be someone who does
School setting.
checkout now, but there isn't someone who gives instruction to kind of give that. I remember my librarian in elementary school, and the assistant, Mrs. Uli, who I taught in 8th grade. But I think that's a really important piece of getting that love of reading. So I just say, anything you can do to help spread the word about how important it is to have that for our students in the primary grades. Great.
Thank you for that.
If I might just tag on to Hannah's comment, there are also some wonderful partners in libraries in post-secondary, community colleges, and the state university system who it seems to me would be natural partners for this effort.
Thank you.
Dick?
Yes, yeah, I think I said it here before, but this is like an IPO launching something endeavor like this, and I would say that we need to not only sell to the choir, so to speak. This is somewhat what you presented as a soft sell, and reading books, I guess, is a soft sell, but also we need to hit the, what's in it for me. For example, maybe the bookmark on one side you have the economics of what a person receives by 3rd grade reading versus at the end of another 10 years or something. I mean, just more of a striking the whole community, not just a segment who really understands the reading, but we want to scratch the itch on the full 100% of the community, and some of that doesn't get it, like myself at one time, and you really need to go after that and be a little bit punchier and saying what's the message of what's in it for me. Why should I get involved and have that when you do the launch? And also on these focus groups, I would bring in the chambers, I would bring in some of the business community possibility and get their input, not just the choir.
We have time for one more question. Nicole?
So I am very supportive. I think there is so much good about this. And the one suggestion I would share is that I think that there is some opportunity for improvement in the pledge section. I think a lot of communities would find that rather condescending. And some of the language is actually borderline offensive in the pledges. And I'm happy to give specific.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I appreciate it.
Chris and I just might add too that there are so many initiatives going along that we have moving at this time, and you already said it once, but I'll just reinforce it. The racks and the hubs, our goals are right along tied to this 3rd grade. Everybody's locking on. So as much as our stakeholders could see that these are integrated rather than isolated initiatives, that's, it's not an easy lift.
Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah.
Let me just add one more. I just wanted to add one more thought on to what Dick was saying about the what's in it for me. The data helps some groups and some people, but I think also looking at that sometimes through culturally responsive ones would include things like identity and family identity and benefits of that kind of softer component are going to sort of hit at the heart. And oftentimes that's the part many of us who lead educational initiatives are leading from the head and not from what's in the heart of that. The other thing I was going to suggest, and I'm assuming it's going to be done, and I know we'll continue to hear more about literacy initiatives from OEE, but I think it's just how does the work around engaging families get communicated and worked with in the hubs, early learning piece, and then I'm thinking specifically in school districts. We have parent engagement strategies, things we're trying to do. We'd love a little bit of help if you learn some things and know some things that we ought to be doing, and I'm not exactly sure that I see any very direct strategy for how we would get that to work together. And I think about next fall especially, the opportunity around moving to full-day kindergarten. For some of us who will move title dollars into preschools, we've got a big push happening that will really impact third grade reading. So this year gives us an opportunity to work on this campaign, learn some things, but then how do we get very intentional about helping school districts capitalize on the momentum and I'm thinking about our meeting earlier with best practices about getting very concrete about what are those things that are working with families, resonating with families. If it's down to 2 or 3 or 4 real quick things that are going to get some results, how do we make a campaign really out of those in terms of sharing across all the strategies?
Kristen, we sure appreciate it. Nice job, and I'll echo what Hannah said. Great job persevering. Hannah, do you have one final comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I know you're trying to move us, but
Right.
I really think this is important to share a little bit more about this and make sure
Okay.
that everyone's had an opportunity. I know as chair it's hard sometimes to keep on schedule, but when we're having a conversation like this and you ask, the question that we were supposed to be asking is what excites, I'd like to share what excites me. This is about the whole child. You're talking about playing, reading, being together with your family, and it really is, I think, something that is exciting about the work that we're doing is to instill that love of learning, and I really appreciated that component of this. I'm excited about it.
So I'm just going to, since Hannah opened the door.
It's open.
Because I wanted to answer that question. So I really like the talk, play, sing, and read. And I think dialing up some of the other ones besides just the reading as a reinforcement, knowing that different kids access reading in different ways, or what gets them excited about learning to read can come different ways, especially kids who might be challenged. So, thinking of ways for parents and community members to help kids access reading through this talk, play, and sing, I think would be helpful because it's not just intuitive that parents know how to use those other channels to help kids to read, but I think that will be key, and that's what I really like about the campaign. It's not just one avenue into reading.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4. We have quite a bit of business and a lot of work's been done here. I want to personally thank all of you for the time you've put in on these subcommittees. As we look at these reports that are coming out, they reflect many, many hours of people sitting up here and staff as well working on these reports. And we do have 2 first readings but we do have a second with an action item. So we'll start with Yvonne with the Best Practice and Student Transition Subcommittee.
No, you're not. You're going to start with me.
I am, because why? She took off?
Yeah, she left.
What's that?
She's gone for a second.
Okay.
Is that okay, start with me?
I don't see why not. Let's go ahead and move right to outcomes and investments then.
Okay. First of all, Mark, I'd like to echo your comments on the time put into the committee. I'd like to thank my Anna Vanderling, Ann Curtis, Ron Saxon, and Jonathan Wise for meeting about every week here for a while. We have a couple other subcommittees also. Matter of fact, we met so many times that I've got their social security numbers and I'm claiming them as attendance. But seriously though, and also for Peter Trump for babysitting us. And that was very important. So let me flip it over to Nancy here first, as you can introduce what we're about, and then we'll be up for some answers. So, Nancy?
Thank you. We are going to stay on track in the right order because they really do feed into each other, because the first ones really have to do with policy work. But that's great. Thank you for thanking. So we'll start with Yvonne, and then we'll go on to...
Is Hilda going to start?
Yes, Hilda's going to
Hilda, you're
start
gonna start
us,
us.
and then
Okay.
Yvonne's going to talk on that committee, and then we'll go back to outcomes and investments.
Dick is reminding us of the importance of keeping on track. So for the record, my name is Hilda Rosselli.
and I have the pleasure this year of supporting the Best Practices in Student Transitions Committee. And we thought before you hear the recommendations from Dr. Curtis, who chaired the subcommittee, it'd be good to just differentiate a little bit about how what you're going to hear differs from the strategic investments that you're going to hear later when Dick Withnell's committee reports out. As suggested, the name of this committee, Best Practices in Student Transitions, really that was what they stuck to this year. In fact, I counted up this morning, they met for 26 hours this year. So bravo to them for that. And with that, they focused on a lot of key areas of work. And in addition to the 2 or 3 areas that we were asked to prioritize for strategic investments, the committee really focused on 3 buckets of work that you're going to hear about. One are tasks or actions that the committee feels warrants further attention by a particular agency. It may be an agency seated at this table or somewhere else. Secondly, policies or administrative rules that merit some review and further attention. It might be that we tweak some language that would remove a barrier or help with transitions. And thirdly, efforts that are currently underway that the subcommittee felt were so on target with the metrics that you're trying to move and achieve that we wanted to call that out as the work progresses. These recommendations are also helping to shape the scope of action for this committee's work this year. So without further ado, I turn it over to Chair Curtis.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I was absent for a few minutes. Thought I could do that quicker than you were ready for me. So, first I'd like to remind the board that our committee arranged our work around some 4 key areas, and you'll see in your document you have a color-coded version that has them sort of highlighted. And we are really excited about how this has been a good organizer and will organize us forward going into the next year, and that we will stay on target in these categories and begin to go deeper. I also want you to know we had a much longer list, but as we started to get very, very focused on where are we with these now and what did we need for this board to understand and support going forward, and then where did we really have more work to do, and we ended up with this 2-page document instead of a PowerPoint, hoping that we can really focus you on what we think is really important. First, one thing we noticed in this K through 12 student transitions set of ideas or recommendations, 3 of the 4 are really focused on our ELL students. So when you think about our committee and our work to identify best practices around the transitions, but also thinking about barriers. The first one we call out is this idea about analyzing practices and current strategic investments that are very specific to what has helped our ELL students exit the ELL program successfully before high school, because we did see some data this year from ODE that shows that students in our state who do that are more successful and achieve at higher levels. So we will be working a little bit more closely with ODE and asking to find out what they learn as we go forward on that, but that was a piece we wanted to make sure that we don't let go of how important that piece of information it is and how it might inform a lot of our work for literacy, but specifically for ELLs. The next one, and so that's work that will be with our committee as well as with the OEIB research arm and policy unit as well as with ODE. Also with ODE, we received a report from COSA and support the idea that we think it's important to support the initiative for full-day kindergarten and send the message that full-day kindergarten, access to full-day kindergarten is important for every student in the state. We understand that there are some barriers that have to do with facilities or have to do with various different kinds of things, enough teachers with licensure or whatever some of those issues are, but we wanted to make that statement to say as an OEIB, we should say it's important for every student. So let's go to work on the things that are creating barriers in some districts. Also, there was an idea about some flexibility. Sometimes, especially in days of old, we had a lot of rules, I would say in ODE, that sometimes kept us from being innovative about how we use time, for example. And so there was a suggestion about the need for professional development for our kindergarten teachers, not only as we begin full-day kindergarten, but in an ongoing way. And are there some ways to look at the calendar days that we label as instruction as including professional development, maybe even more to an extent that we currently have, as we start this new initiative and an opportunity to maybe engage teachers in an ongoing way in professional development. Different school districts have different ways of suggesting how to do that. So that would be work with ODE, and I know they're already looking at some of those things. Current work underway that we just wanted to highlight. There is some current work around developing a high school diploma by literacy seal, and today we had this conversation, is that bilingual or by literacy? And I want to say from our committee, we believe it should say bilingual, so we need to work with others doing that work to make sure that bilingual, by literacy, we're clear about the language and what does that mean, which also means we're going to have to take a look at the metrics and make sure that what metrics we're using to identify bilingualism, biliteracy, that all of that is lined up. So we know really what we're looking at, how we're going to measure that. The next one is supporting work we know ODE is already working on, but there's definitely a need for Spanish summative reading assessment at grades 3, 4, and 5. And this is really important because in our state, as you've heard us talk about and others, we have growing numbers of dual language schools because we know it's important for students to be multilingual, right? And so we've encouraged that as a state, and many of the models have students working in their native language or their primary language for literacy early on. So it's not going to work to say they should be on grade level reading in English if their first reading instruction is in a different language. That we've got to have a way of measuring literacy as well as English literacy and English language development. And with the Smarter Balanced assessments that are coming on board, we don't have that capacity to do that. So we support ODE's idea of looking for those assessments, and you know that one of the strategic investments, actually that's coming next, but points to interim assessments in Spanish as well. That's not to say that Spanish is all we need. But if we can figure out how to do this work around Spanish and get it done right, then as we add more languages in the state, then we can continue to sort of use that learning and that same work. In the next area, I just wanted to give Mark and Dave an opportunity to speak about some important points. Mark, do you want to go first in that area?
Well, why don't you keep going and I'll add to that.
Okay, so I'll just mention one thing that came up in our conversation, and that is this idea to think about that whole K-12, specifically around ELLs, about progress and opportunities, and that the value is around the assets and how we use those as possibilities. And so looking at Eastern Promise, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is another way of example of how we can do that. Student transitions 11 to 14. A lot of this is focused on understanding the barriers that are in the way. Looking at the first one, working with OEIB as well as the HEC around completion rates in remedial education. And that's kind of the whole basket of work about why do kids end up in developmental ed or remedial education? What are the barriers? And then if you look at the next one about what can we learn from the Eastern Promise models about accelerate and the work with the Accelerated Learning Committee to say, what are we learning about developmental ed and getting some things done earlier or taking out barriers or looking at that extension in a different way. Mark, do you want to add?
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about developmental ed, and this has been a pretty hot topic. As we know, a great many of our kids, when they leave, if they're entering community colleges, are being placed in remedial classes, and the success rate for completion is very poor, especially for our underserved populations finishing if they're experiencing remedial education. So there are a lot of factors for that. And so we've talked about that at length, but one thing that is in the Eastern Promise specifically is we've created the fourth pathway, which is a credit by proficiency pathway, where the compass testing or AccuPlacer is not required. And we're going to be taking a look at the data where we have an avenue where kids who traditionally would not be able to enter those classes because of their compass scores are now in there without any prereqs. And we're going to compare data to see how those kids are. So that was one example. And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of you or not, Yvonne, but we also talked about as we move forward with the Smarter Balance Assessment, and this will be our first experience with the summative component this spring, can we use that as an indicator as we move into college as well? So over-testing our students is a concern. And when you look at the myriad of assessments they have, and the gate starts shutting very quickly. And so as we move to the Smarter Balance, as we look at its potential to prepare for college and career in a higher level of rigor, can that satisfy some of those components so that we aren't over-testing?
Mark, can I just process question?
Yes.
The way that we're going to move through these, there's going to be a presentation by the chair, and then we're going to have a discussion, or how are we going to utilize our time?
Yes, the chair is presenting and overviewing each one of those, but Yvonne, since I serve on that subcommittee, she asked me to fill in on that. So as we looked at it, at least from our perspective, Julia, is this is a first reading. The chair's reporting out with committee feedback. That was the format that we intended. We do have an action item coming up. Is that answering your question?
So when you say a first reading, so we're supposed to give our feedback?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
So I'll just add that because there were so many, I mean, these are all four really big areas with a lot of information, a lot of groups that came to us reporting. We did sort of specialize as committee members. So Mark and Dave worked a lot on the 11 to 14. That's why Mark's jumping in as a part of my report out. So I'll just call out the rest of the items under that 11 to 14. We're asking the HEC to identify solutions to barriers faced by students accessing the Oregon Opportunity Grant who lack citizenship and who have earned a modified diploma. So there's a couple areas there where we have some barriers that we think the HEC ought to take a look at. Next, if you turn the paper over, on number 2, address barriers for districts falling short of eligibility for TRIO and program funding. So a lot of example is TRIO, another one is Gear Up. A lot of times we get seed money and we get opportunity to work on these things. And I'll just say, as a district who was a part of the TRIO program, literally got kicked out of the program once we became successful. So we successfully got kids off to college and doing well, and then there's no funding to continue that. Well, the strategies we put in place for that required those additional dollars. Those weren't ones we had within our regular budget. So we have to work on how do we create, when we create these opportunities and they're successful, how do we send the right message of sustaining that work? So more work needs to be done around that. And we're asking the HEC to look at that as well. The next one is examine solutions to the summer melt, which is basically the handoff between high school and the post-secondary. There are some projects where people are reaching down and doing some counseling over the summer, sort of being with students all through their college experience and helping them through that. We're asking for more work to be done to highlight what are some solutions and what might we do going forward. And then exploring the future use of Smarter Balance, which Mark already talked about in terms of in lieu of placement tests. The other thing we wanted to call out that we see as our work for next time, but I think it is important to mention here because it is implied in our 0 to 20 kind of vision, and that is that it's about proficiency in kids gaining the knowledge and skills. And we are meeting with barriers in a lot of those pieces of work we're trying to do collectively as we work across the levels in the institutions around definitions of proficiency, how should proficiency be done, and so on. So that's another area that we just wanted to make sure that as we identify HEC to work on these areas for us, that considering that idea of proficiency and what part it plays is important. At some point, I think the full board should take a stand on where we stand about proficiency across the 0 to 20, not just in, for example, high schools. The next area is educator quality, and this is work that we're already working with Teacher Standards and Practice Commission and Oregon Association of College for Teacher Education. Hilda's very involved with all of this work. The first one is identifying best practice for selecting and preparing and compensating cooperating teachers. It's oftentimes hard for teachers to raise their hand and say, I'll be a cooperating teacher, when there's some real barriers there, like the new evaluation system. Their evaluation is based on student achievement, so they might not want to use what has been a traditional model of being a cooperating teacher and turning their class over to this brand new person who's learning to be a teacher. So that's just to name one barrier. There are others, and there are groups working on some solutions. So we'll continue to work with them on that, but asking TSBC and OACTE to work together and also come to us with some of the solutions. The next one is identifying funding sources for educator preparation programs to implement Goal 7 of the EL State Strategic Plan, to include EL basic knowledge strategies in the curriculum of all future educators. So making sure that the educators understand how to serve ELL students and have the skills for that. The third one is identify ways to align evaluation tools across education prep programs with state framework for educator effectiveness. So aligning evaluation that's happening for teachers as well as for those who are doing student teaching, and making sure that there's alignment so they're ready for that. The fourth one is to identify program content and experiences that could enhance future secondary level teachers' ability to support both college as well as career and technical education success for students. That whole area of CTE is an area that we're all wanting to see expansion to get that middle 40, more pathways there. So that's another piece that we'll work with those two groups in. The last one is the area of digital conversion, and we had narrowed down to a couple of points, but I kind of need to circle back and say that there is a COSA work group, and actually OEIB had some members, and so did OEE, who participated in developing a powering up sort of vision for Oregon around digital conversion. And the first item they had on there, and so I'm kind of inserting that back in, is this idea of how do we make sure every district has the high speed they need. And I'm going to use Mark's phrase, which was, when you don't have enough fiber in McDermott.
It was just an expression.
It's an expression, but an example of, you can have the devices, we could have the curriculum, we could have the professional development, but if they don't have access, we've just created another barrier. The next one we have identified is ways to help fund digital devices for students. So we recognize that districts are making headway and moving forward. And we also recognize that there's going to come a time when kids are coming with 3 and 4 devices, some of them, not all students. How do we create a strategy statewide that provides for districts to have, and at the higher level as well, to have opportunities for students who can't afford those devices to be able to have access to them without even worrying about that being a barrier. We think that there needs to be a mechanism that districts can apply to, a distribution mechanism. And the last one under that is providing dedicated staff to develop and implement a strategic plan that addresses barriers identified in the Power Up report developed by COSA, Confederation of School Administrators. So what we found out is that ODE, they have had a 0.5 FTE to support all the work that's going on in technology in the state. Given where we're going, that just seemed like it didn't make a lot of sense. We definitely need dedicated people, probably more than 0.5. We know that ODE is already working on identifying some FTE in order to support that, but we wanted to call that out because oftentimes I think we don't understand kind of the dire straits we have been in the past, and that there are just some basic things we need to get in place in order to have the capacity to move to that next level. So I also was asked to talk about the work going forward, or Mark, do you want to pause right here?
Why don't we pause and
Okay.
let the board weigh in on comments, questions?
Julia?
Yeah?
Well, I was just wondering,
Oh, 1 second.
Go ahead.
I just, if it's not a comment or question, do we have the ability to recommend changes? Or what, is this a,
Absolutely, provide some feedback.
I'm gonna let Hannah go and then I'll summarize.
Okay. Yeah.
And my question was on the digital conversion and the technology. So do we have a report that's coming to us that says where districts are as far as their technology for the implementation of Smarter Balance, to say, is a district prepared to implement the Smarter Balance test at this moment in time?
Yeah, Rob, that's a good question to ask. I know regionally we've done that. I don't know statewide if that's been done specifically on what needs to happen.
No.
Yeah. I know, Hannah, we've done that regionally for our school.
So I'm just going to say, I think there's two parts to that. One part is addressed, actually a more global view of that is in the Power Up report, where there is a recommendation that we actually, with some help with this additional FTE that will be allocated at ODE, that be part of the work is actually deciding what does that look like if a district is ready for X. So one piece of that would be ready for Smarter Balance. Another part would be just to scale up. And if where 1-to-1 is where most districts are going, what does that look like and what do people need? There is some work out there, and that's part of what we're hoping they'll have the capacity to do, is to identify what does that kind of framework look like? How do they help districts do that kind of assessment and move forward? So there is a plan to do that, or at least a suggestion to do that.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important. I mean, we're getting ready to launch Smarter Balance, and I know we're doing some work within OEA around technology and that fiber, yet we are really struggling to have the capacity. And with the new assessment, while I've heard that it's the same technology requirements for Oaks and Smarter Balance, that's not what I'm hearing from those who have piloted it. And it's so, if we're not ready and we set everyone up for technology's going to blow up the first week of implementation, not a good idea. So I would hope that we have the foresight to figure that out, make sure they're ready. And if they're not, we need to have a plan on what we're going to do about it.
Julie?
So just, I have a couple overarching comments and then some specific ones. Just an overarching comment. I would be interested in having some time elements attached to this because some of these could easily stretch into projects that are multiple years, and I think just the discipline of identifying what are the highest priorities to have done first and timeframes. Then more specifically in the section on student transitions, 11 to 14, the issue on the maximizing the senior year, I guess what the question I would have is, wouldn't we want to have them maximizing all your years of high school? I know a lot of kids take their foot, the gas gets taken off the accelerator in the senior year because they have enough credits, for example. But I would think we'd want to look at this as not when all of a sudden you get your senior year, you're looking to see if you're in the college readiness mode or on a track, because I think that's too late. So I think some sort of glide path or trajectory from the start versus, and then I agree, fully maximizing the senior year, but not just looking at that in isolation. And then the other one I have is the D under the student transitions 11 to 14. I intended to bring this up later around the achievement compacts, but the issue of coordination, preparation, and sort of the transition between high school graduation and either entry into community college, a trade school, or the higher ed system, this sort of disconnect between students getting a diploma and the diploma actually not meaning they're ready for any one of those particular steps. So I think some things that I would be interested in finding out is what the data that we have from community colleges on need for remedial classes. The numbers I've heard are up to 60% of students entering community college need remediation. The other thing is part of this, so Smarter Balance seems like something that's way in the distance, and I'm looking at kids now, students who are leaving high school and taking placement tests for community college and failing and having to take media classes is what's the possibility, and I raised this last time, Ben mentioned with Ben Cannon, is of there being one test for community colleges so that their students know what they're aiming at, and that's consistent around the state. So Smarter Balance may be one future measurement, but it seems like we have tests that are occurring right now, and something that may be more immediate, or an interim step is having something that's gets so that there's one approach by the community colleges, not 17 different approaches. I'd be interested in
Well, I think we're interested in one approach, and I think, I'm going to speak for K-12, I think Smarter Balance isn't in the future for us. It is the measure for us that we're looking at to say, are they college and career ready? And I realize in terms of counting for graduation and those kinds of things could be in the future, but in terms of what are we teaching to and pointing to, Smarter Balance for us is right now with the Common Core. One of the issues, I think, is that idea of multiple assessments, and I think, and it's just me speaking, but even if we come up with one assessment for the community colleges, if it's not aligned with our curriculum and what we're teaching at the K-12, we're still going to have this mismatch, and I'll just explain just what happens for a lot of our kids, and by the way, the number in our county is 88% of the kids go to remedial. But I don't think all of it means they're not ready. We have kids who've passed AP exams who get remanded to remedial classes and no opportunity to apply for other classes until they pass certain tests. And I think part of that is the age-old problem of you're using tests that aren't necessarily aligned with what the curriculum is. So I know that David's talked a lot about this, is the work that we need to do is align that curriculum and what our expectations are between high school and colleges so that we pick the right assessment so we're not sending kids different messages along the way. But your concern is the same concern we have and are interested in getting at that.
And we have, I mean, there's a committee that's been working on it. No surprise in Oregon, there's been a committee working on this. And for the past year, and so maybe what we want to look at is a report out with that. They've done tremendous work, a lot along the lines of what Julie is talking about.
So I guess I'd like to inject some urgency, because if the numbers are 88%, I mean, that's money that students are paying out of their own pockets to take classes that they're not getting credit for. So, and I guess I'm not saying that Smarter Balance isn't the measurement, but there's going to be a lot of conversation around it and how ready people are. So I'm not, I guess I'm one board member who's not interested in having sort of a whole another year pass while we're having a discussion about Smarter Balanced and kids from districts having to take classes that they pay for, that they thought they left an Oregon high school prepared for their next step, and they weren't, and they're having to pay for it out of their own pocket. So I guess I'm interested in accelerated discussion about what that collaboration looks like. What do K-12 teachers need, and what do the community college instructors and the higher ed professors need in order to have that conversation, so there's an agreement, not to lower the standards, but an agreement on kids being ready for school.
Well, yeah, it's exactly that, and what Yvonne said, it's aligning the curriculum. So when you've completed the top level math or writing or science in high school, that your next step at that entry level course in college is the next step. And it's something the colleges and universities throughout the state helped align their curriculum with the first 2 years of transfer classes, those foundation classes. I mean, they weren't necessarily aligned back when I was going to college, I remember. Having to do a lot of planning, so they were when I transferred. But now they have aligned those, and what we're talking about here is getting the high schools and the colleges and universities to align, like I said, the transition between those steps. And part of it, Hilda, is OEIB's helping to start some meetings and get basically you have to have the high schools and colleges coming together and start talking about what are those expectations.
Head northwest.
But I think it's something along the same process that it took for the colleges and universities to align their foundation, their transfer courses.
That'd be great. I think the other thing I would say is to have a statewide systemic approach, not just a regional approach,
Yeah.
because some kids may go to high school in Portland and then go to Blue Mountain Community College, or go to high school in Eugene and go to PCC. So really looking at it from a student-focused integration, but again, we're probably, what are the identified supports that the K-12 educators need and the higher ed system.
Good.
Thank you,
Great
and I
feedback.
think we can add your suggestions around urgency and some of the other things you talked about, time elements, timeframes, and moving to include all of the high school years, not just senior year, so that there is that glide path. So we can make those adjustments and bring adjusted language forward, because I think what you're asking for, Julia, is the spirit of what we were getting at. You're just giving us some more specifics.
Okay, we good on that one? Matt?
Just coming from OUS and some experience with Eastern Promise, I do think their intent, and I think some of the findings of Eastern Promise were fairly specific to the senior year.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's another way to be responsive to Julia's comments that maybe provides a little more definition around the senior year. Because I don't think the intent was necessarily de-emphasize the other years, Julia. I think this is a recognition of the whole 11 through 14 is a need. But I do think that in conversations and in findings, there does seem to be a bit of a rallying point around the specific lost opportunity that we have in our senior year. So it's, I don't, in the hundreds and thousands of conversations I've had when people have asked what does OEIP do, this is one of those very specific places where people nod their head and say, I get that. Senior year is actually a very significant lost opportunity. So I wonder if we might be responsive to Julie's comments by providing more specificity around the current lost opportunity and how that needs to be addressed, as opposed to maybe implying that the rest of 11 through 14 isn't important.
So I take that as a very friendly amendment. So I don't want to detract at all from that senior year. So having just had a couple kids go through their senior year in high school, there is a sense of like letting off the gas in the sense that you don't have to necessarily through your freshman and junior year. I guess so. What I would look at is like what's the scaffolding to make that senior year meaningful that needs to build their.
Yeah, and I think maybe without being too harsh, maybe some language around if there is a current lost opportunity. And if anything, my reaction to this was that it seems a little bit overly emphasizing college readiness. I think a lot of the other senior year discussions, I guess this is a reference to Eastern Promise, but a lot of the other senior year discussions have also been kind of career readiness as well, so that might be another adjustment.
Okay. We'll bring new language to you next time.
Okay. So-
do you want me to just talk about it going forward really quickly?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know this was something Nancy had asked me as we were getting clearer at lunch. So we just want to show you, we have a chart that has the same color coding, because what that really means is we're going to stay focused in those 4 areas. And the area that we really want to go deep is the 11 to 14, so you'll see there's many recommendations there, but we also even have a longer list of very specific things going on that we're going to be asking groups to report to us. And we just came up with today this idea that perhaps across our committees, we could have some way of developing a framework for how we report and talk about all these recommendations that starts with naming the best practice, identifying what is the metric, and then a timeline, just like Julia was asking for. So as we start to look at these, they don't just look like generic suggestions, but that we actually know which ones we're going to take ground on. The other thing we want to make sure we identify is, as we talk about best practice, what is the research, or even more importantly, naming if it's an innovation and a promising practice, because oftentimes, if we wait for the research, which often takes 5 or 6 years to get published, in the meantime, we're missing the places where they're getting results already. let's fast forward this idea of an implementation timeline and fast forward to who's getting the results, what are they actually doing, bringing those to best practice, calling those out, and connecting the dots to all of the initiatives. So that's something we plan to do, and we'd like to share that template with the other committees. It might make, when we work together a little bit, it might make it quicker as we go forward on that. The last point on that was, we want to really hone in on the taking action piece. So as we get clear on each of these initiatives, what are those components we need to take action on and tie them to a timeline? I think that's it.
Okay. So this was a first reading. We will hear more. Next up is a second reading and an action item from the Equity and Partnership Subcommittee. So Nicole and Shadeen, you're on.
We are very pleased to be with you today to discuss our policy framework for youth without high school diplomas. We have entitled this policy framework Creating a Shoreline of Opportunities. We did preview this policy at our last meeting, and were able to take many of your great suggestions. And since that time, we have been reaching out to groups across the state of Oregon to get additional input and improvements. First, I'd like to thank my fellow committee members, Dr. Henry, Julia Burton-Edwards, Matt Donegan, who actually was at our meeting where we decided to take this issue on and gave great input. And certainly I would like to appreciate and acknowledge all of you in the audience who have come today and taken time out of your busy schedules to come and support this important policy framework. So thank you to all of those of you who are here. So this is a really important issue, and it's a really important issue for the Equity Committee, but it's a really important issue for the success of 40-40-20. Today in Oregon, more than 1 out of 4 Oregonian students does not complete a high school diploma or receive a high school equivalency. Today we have more than 350,000 young adults and adults who live in our state who have neither a high school diploma or a high school equivalency. And while we on the Equity Committee, and I believe every person on this board is passionate about improving our early childhood system and our K-12 system so that this is not a need, we recognize that today and for many years to come, we have a number of students that will remain in a segregated group without a diploma for many years. We also want to make it clear that when we think about high school equivalency, we believe that the most important outcome related to this is that students receive a high school equivalency prepared for career and for college, and that we feel very strongly that those receiving a high school equivalency belong in all parts of the 40-40-20, not just the 20. When we decided to take this on as an Equity Committee, we certainly discussed that this is an important issue for everyone on the OEIP board, but we were definitely drawn to it because the fact remains that in the state of Oregon, students of color, students with disabilities, and low-income students continue to be overrepresented in the population of students who is not receiving a high school diploma, and they continue to be underrepresented in the services that serve students trying to gain a high school equivalency, or what is commonly known as the GED, which is the only high school equivalency that we offer in the state of Oregon. We are not the first group to take this issue on. We're actually building on the excellent work of our Secretary of State, who completed a full audit that made it abundantly clear that we have an incredibly fragmented system that is not serving Oregonian students well. And we are building on the work of the Portland City Club, who took a statewide approach to doing a systemic policy analysis and making some excellent recommendations about how we can unify our efforts and improve our systems to serve students. So we humbly looked at the recommendations of both of those groups. We had many conversations with leaders running exceptional alternative schools and learning about their experience and the number of students that they wanted to serve but couldn't serve, and put together this policy framework. We intentionally refer to it as a shoreline as opposed to a pipeline because we believe there should be many opportunities that really meet the needs of students in the best way for them. And the symbolism of a pipeline creates an image where there's only one way to be successful, and we know there are many ways for students in Oregon to be successful. With that said, I will just note that we were fortunate to receive letters of endorsements from leaders across our state who have significant interest in this issue and significant credibility in this field of work. We were pleased to receive an endorsement from the Executive Director of Open Meadows, Andrew Mason, who operates the longest continuously operating alternative school in our state with fantastic outcomes. And while they do not actually provide GED services, they felt that this was a really important issue. We were pleased to be endorsed by the Coalition of Communities of Color, who represents over 40 organizations representing 6 ethnic groups who felt very strongly that this is one of the most important policy issues to be successful at 40-40-20. And we had resounding support and endorsement from Latino Network, as well as the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable and Native Family Center, among many other distinguished business and nonprofit leaders who gave us great input and support. At this time, I'd like to invite up Chandni Garcia, who will give us a little bit more specific information about both the policy as well as some of the investments we are proposing. I'd like to appreciate Chandni. She's been a phenomenal support, and of course, Peter has been a wonderful support as well. Chandni is going to prepare or present a little bit more information, and then we have some wonderful community leaders who will also share their perspective about this work.
Hello, thank you. First, I would like to apologize for my shaky voice or my shaky hands. I have to tell you, I have given speeches at the University of Oregon, thousands of people, at Yale when I was an undergrad. None of that compares to the fact that my 72-year-old father called in today and is listening today, hi Dad, from rural New Mexico. So, although I would like to say you all make me nervous, you do, but it's nothing like feeling like you're 8 years old again, talking to your dad about your report card.
That's pressure.
So, high school equivalency. I would like to first start out with the distinction. You'll hear me say HSE often and not GED. And it's not because I'm signifying a switch away from a commitment to GED. It's because GED is now brand name. So it was purchased. And so when I say high school equivalency, I need you to know that I'm not making this choice of saying, no, we're going to bring in all these other testers. We currently endorse and use GED, but in looking at language later, we need to look at what those policy shifts are going to need to be in the future. So, just the facts. At any given point, between 25 and 30% of Oregonians do not obtain a high school diploma or the equivalent. It could be 4 and 10 depending on the time of year. The reason I put this slide up here is because we tend to look at statistics and make decisions based on those statistics. When I did professional development as an administrator at a K-8 and when I was at a high school, I forced my teachers to name them. When you look at the 3 images in front of you, these aren't just representing stats, these are representing people. So when you think of students who don't obtain a diploma, these are real people and these are real lives. And I know you know that, but the more we see the images, the more it reminds us that it's not just a statistic that we're talking about. We have the best intentions. We have a pipeline approach that's meant to direct students to 40-40-20. And we have supports around this pipeline. We have after-school programs. We have social work responsibilities. We have strategic systems in post-secondary, in work and career. Just a few days ago at the OEIB, we were talking about onboarding and what that means when we hire new people and how we make them welcome and how we maintain their level of happiness and engagement in a workplace. These are best intentions. Unfortunately, pipelines leak over time. And with regard to this initiative, these are the groups who are most affected, which is why I want us to conceptually think about the fact that it has limited capacity and it's a single pathway. When we switch and we look at a shoreline approach, we can imagine the multitude of possible landings. When we switched in the paper that you have in front of you to specifically talk shoreline versus pipeline, it was very intentional. With the shoreline, we let opportunity youth choose their access point.
You'll hear me refer to opportunity youth. Those are students who, ages 19 to 25, never attended high school or never completed high school and/or have a diploma but aren't connected in a post-secondary and/or who are unable to gain a foothold in the labor market. When we make the shift to think about Shoreline, we open up possibilities for not only them to find different avenues, but for us to rethink the avenues we think we were putting them in to begin with. They're empowered, as opposed to us saying, we're empowering you. We're creating a structure where they empower themselves. Excuse me. This is a quote straight out of the City Club report that Nicole mentioned earlier because I liked the way they stated it. Historically, the state has not treated the HSC as part of a comprehensive education system. We have the chance to change that. We got feedback from some of the organizations that Nicole mentioned. We also got feedback that I didn't incorporate specifically into this because I wanted us to think about it when we get to strategy 3. And that's feedback about including adults and including newcomers who are possibly undocumented that are older and out of that opportunity youth category. Our charge is P20. We pushed on that with the opportunity youth, right? Pushing that age to 25. That doesn't exclude adults, and I'm going to talk about that when we get to strategy 3. But the reason I bring it up is because I talked for a second on the next slide about feedback. The process of feedback is important to us, and we want to find ways to engage it when we know that we can think out of the box about how to meet the needs of adults and students needing to get high school equivalency. So I wanted to thank some of the letters that we had in the past few days even of support, because I'm going to mention Mr. Franco or Mr. Mason or Ms. Meyer and so on. So when you hear me reference them, this is what I'm talking about. Strategy number 1 is about alignment. Now, an example that really brings home this point is I was an administrator at a high school. We had a GED prep program there. When it changed to the new GED GED requirements, it was a huge shift for the entire program because it wasn't just about study skills and go in and take a test. It was subject-specific content, and it was online, and the cost was different. There were so many changes. So, like a, regularly competent, hopefully administrator, I started making some phone calls saying, these changes are coming, what do I need to do? The problem was there were a lot of different organizations doing really fantastic work in this area that weren't all necessarily talking to each other. So I called CCWD, met an amazing person that gave me some great advice. I called the testing center that gave me amazing information and some other advice. I called the community college who also gave me, and so what alignment talks about is a work group to pull those groups together and leaders of some of those groups together to give us some common messaging around that so that people that provide HSC preparation actually have common language and are on the same page with the changes. The changes came fast and caught us a little bit unprepared in terms of the full message to those that are providing HSC services. Alignment is also about continued collaboration to ensure that the people who need HSC are referred to local programs. And last, alignment refers to data shared among organizations. We weren't sharing from our high school the numbers of students that were obtaining it with community colleges and how they were obtaining it, and sharing it with testing centers and how they were obtaining GED credentials. I think that information is rich and could help inform the efficacy of our programs. 2, access. It's expensive. It's more than double the cost at some of the testing centers, up to $150. We need to investigate ways to defray that cost. We also need to think about access not just in terms of money. We need to broaden the set of qualified HSC preparation providers to include community and faith-based organizations that already serve opportunity youth with wraparound services. We need to improve the culturally responsive practices of the state providers. Both Ms. Rubio and Ms. Meyer emphasized the importance of this. And lastly, on access, we need to develop HSC preparations that can be partially delivered online and also in other languages. We know that the new GED offers it in Spanish. We don't know that every service provider offers the preparation in other languages. This is something we can look into because access is key, particularly with those who fall through our leaky pipeline. I also want to address age in this. When we talk about culturally responsive providers, we talk about a shift in values that isn't something that in mainstream language we talk about. So when I say we can broaden this to adults, it's because some communities see adults as both teachers and learners. Some communities see children as both teachers and learners. The beauty of using culturally responsive providers means that the value of the preparation of high school equivalency can push beyond the boundaries that we've ever even envisioned before. And so that feedback about what about grown-ups is critical because we wouldn't want to limit a culturally responsive provider who believes that teachers are both grown-ups and kids. We would want to encourage that. Talking about the value. When people talk about the GED, it's, oh, here she just got a GED. Well, it's a GED. It's not like real high school. It's changed. The value is linked to college and career readiness and Common Core state standards. In fact, they even have a distinction, which is the GED with honors. When and if these policies go through, we get to be a part of changing the value of what a GED means. Not only that, we get to look at public universities and say, look at it too. Some universities have a specific score that they require if you took the GED that you got. We're saying, let's open the conversation. If I have a GED with honors, does that mean I get in right away? What does that mean? What is that? How can you incent that to be a part of it? Because the GED with honors distinction is linked to college and career readiness. Part of the value, Mr. Morton and Ms. Mason emphasized the overall importance of college and career readiness and the overall importance of, according to Mr. Franco from the Latino Partnership, that the Common Core state language also is foreign to people that haven't been in the classroom for a long time. The value of the preparation of high school equivalency the content can shift where people are not just learning study skills, on how to pass the test, but rather content with the language that the state is already endorsing. Research, the fourth and last one. We need to evaluate the effectiveness of our current providers, and then also, if approved and we expand the providership, evaluate the effectiveness of them. I think we also need to investigate other alternatives in the state. Lane ESD, we heard feedback from Ms. Waite that emphasized the importance of the fact that just because we have our own unique context doesn't mean we don't have a lot to learn from other states and what they're doing. I think research can both inform, encourage, and shape how we create these programs. I started out with saying the 3 out of 10, the 4 out of 10 are people. I would like to introduce you to 2 people who have received their GED. Adam Clark is a PCC graduate with a bachelor's in psychology from Portland State. He now works at Portland Community College with the Yes to College programs, as well as Gateway to College and Future Connect. And Kat Gaske, she is a Portland Youth Builders GED graduate, recently completed her bachelor's degree at Lewis and Clark, and is now an AmeriCorps volunteer with Portland Youth Builders.
Hello, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Great to hear from you.
Sure. So my name is Kat Caskey. I'm a Portland native. I want to start by saying that the 40-40-20 initiative is an ambitious step on the road toward Oregon's educational standards. But I can honestly say that as things stand in the state, we will not reach the projected goal date of 2025. I'm concerned about the state of our high schools in Oregon and in Portland specifically. Many of our high schools are failing to produce graduates at an acceptable rate, but more importantly, they're failing to prepare their students for college or other vocational tracks. This is, of course, a very complex issue, as we know, but I think it would be naive and irresponsible of us to blame our education statistics solely on the individual. For example, I enrolled at Franklin High School as a freshman in 2001. It's in Southeast Portland. It always seemed to be more of a popularity contest or a beauty pageant rather than an institution of learning, and I quickly felt out of odds there. So I dropped out as a senior in 2005. And I didn't think about school again until I turned 21 in 2008. At that point, I enrolled at Portland Youth Builders, which is a nonprofit alternative school for at-risk and minority youth ages 17 to 24. There, my peers and I learned vocational skills such as construction or computer technology, as well as obtained our GEDs, and many of us, myself included, did so with honors. At PYB, they taught me useful and practical skills that aimed my priorities toward my future academic and professional goals. They funded my first term at Portland Community College. They taught me that completing high school was not the end goal, but simply the beginning of a journey toward lifelong education. After graduating from the program, I continued to study at PCC for 3 years until I graduated with my Associates of Arts Organs Transfer degree with honors, and then transferred to Lewis and Clark College. This past May, I graduated from LC with a BA of Psychology with honors. So as far as the 40-40-20 initiative goes, I'm considered part of the 40% of bachelor's degree holders, but I'm not considered a completer of high school. And I'm wondering if this is fair. We need to have more options for our students because it's a simple fact that traditional high school doesn't work for everyone. I think I'm a good example of that. I didn't fail because I wasn't capable or motivated or even because I necessarily lacked resources. And I believe that if I hadn't participated in the PYB program, I likely wouldn't have finished high school and likely wouldn't have been able to go to college to pursue the degree that I now have. Likewise, my current goal of graduate school would never have even been formed, and I would probably still be working a dead-end job, struggling to make ends meet. It is programs like these that include wraparound social services that we need to be paying attention to in Oregon. Programs that include a pathway from high school completion and GED exams to secondary education or vocational training, as well as a diverse array of support for their students, be it financial or emotional. Programs that are more likely to produce not just completers, but contributing members to our economy. As a society, we're only as strong as the sum of our parts, and right now we could be stronger. So with that, I urge you to consider increasing funding to GED programs and programs like PYB that offer a multifaceted, wraparound approach to student education and success. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicely done.
So I think first I'll just say thank you for having me back. I got to address many of you a few weeks ago, and so I'm back again. I'm hoping you're not tired of me yet. So, I think I echo everything that Kat says there. When I told you guys my story of where I came from, and so today I'm sitting in front of you, part of that 40% with a bachelor's degree. I have a passion for education. That's why I'm here today. And none of that would have happened without a GED. So that's one step. Like the HSC is important in the fact that, well, I'm not a high school graduate per se. I'm to that point where I'm moving forward, and now I'm starting to pay it back. And so 8 years ago, which is a very short time ago, but seems like a couple lifetimes ago, I was about to be a teen father for the first time. I was a felon. And I never went to school. I didn't enjoy it. There was nothing there for me. And there never was going to be anything there for me. No matter all the hard work you people might do to make that environment better, it just wasn't right for me. And what I found at PCC, at the YES program, it was not just my chance to finish high school and to do it for myself quicker and move on to the next step into college, but I found a family there as well. I didn't have that. That's a lot of the reason I struggled. I did not have the resources that maybe Kat or other students had. And I found those resources in the community, not Not because my high school counselor at Barlow High School told me. They told me, you're screwed. Like, you're done. You got to walk away. You're not going to do anything useful here. Go figure it out. Get a job. And I did. And I didn't figure out anything useful there either. It wasn't until I got those supports and got people who believed in me and gave me the shoreline approach. They said, this is where you are, and you can go wherever you want, and we're going to help you find it. And so, you know, I'll just back up everything Kat said and say this is an extremely important issue. And there's a number of students, including adults out there right now, who weren't served. And I was lucky to get served and find those services, but we're failing a lot of people. And we got to stop failing those people, because I could be across town right now in a different meeting than this if not for those options. And so,
Thank you both.
Here's some materials.
Very inspiring, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I want to thank our guests and thank you. There's no better way to understand the complexity of this issue than hearing it from those who have experienced it firsthand, and I appreciate your willingness to share your story, your full and complete story, so thank you for that. At this time, Shanti, do we want to invite questions or clarifications and then call it for a full vote?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're happy to hear any questions or singing of praises for how amazing our policy is.
I'd like to just make a comment, and that is that I would just, I'm just really excited to see what you learn and how we can apply that within our community. So in a community that's way different than Portland, we recognize every day the need for alternative options for kids. And we have quite a few that we contract with, but there's never enough spots. There's a lot of difficulty in coordinating kind of how those services happen, and, you know, is it really equivalent to what our high school diploma is? And I'm really excited for the work, because I think there's some good programs already in our state, but we're just not maximizing them and maximizing what we're learning and what they might already be learning about how to connect with kids that those of us in the traditional school aren't connecting with. And no, honestly, I was a kindergarten teacher. I knew in kindergarten which kids our system wasn't serving. So it's not like we have to wait to have kids drop out at those higher levels where they are at risk. They're bigger bodies, but have not had the supports they needed all along the way. And so I think it's a great opportunity to connect what we're learning there. How do we connect the dots to what we want to do with the early learning piece, so that we start sort of digging and taking it early. So I know it's a big goal, but I think it's possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anna?
So just process question. So we're being asked to take action on this. There's a recommendation that's in front of the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee, number 14. Is this? So are we taking action on the investment, or are we taking action on what exactly does it mean when we vote right now?
We are asking the OEIB to adopt the policy framework for the state of Oregon. We did outline the 3 investment pieces so that, just for information, certainly later in the investments and outcomes, you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that. Certainly, we felt it was important to create a policy and then develop some resource streams as well, but that will be a separate discussion. So at this point, we are inviting you to adopt this framework and philosophy and worldview.
So it'd be a motion to adopt the framework.
So moved.
It's been moved to adopt the framework as presented. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Dad should be proud.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. You know, these kind of committees, boards we sit on, when we see people, kids and young adults here right in front of us, it gives such extra meaning and makes it all worth it. Fantastic presentation, guys. Thank you. Why don't we take a short recess here? We've been at it for a little bit. Why don't we take a 10-minute break, then we will come back, and Dick, you'll finally be on. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute recess.
Okay, I'm going to begin by just doing an introduction. And Dick, I really appreciate you letting the other two groups go first.
I just try to help my colleagues.
You were great. But this really provided me an opportunity to sort of frame and thank all of the committees for the incredible work they've done. Because when we think about what was the OEIB supposed to do when we started in 2011, it was to create a seamless system of education, to really focus on key transitions, and to come up with concepts and strategies that we think will really overcome barriers along the pathway and move us along the pathway. And I was very taken by the presentations today. What you're seeing in the committee, best practice committees, is they've got some policies they'll be recommending, they've got some tasks they want completed, and they also have things they're going to do in the future. All of the strategies they're talking about, they believe align with the outcomes on the achievement compass and will leverage our students successfully from birth through college and career. I think similarly, when we looked at the policy we just passed, what we see is we're talking 40-40-20 by 2025, and some of our students need not the traditional kind of learning. They need to have other, I think for a long time we've been asking students to change for schools. Schools need to change for students. They don't all learn the same. They don't all learn in the same way. And I thought the two graduates who just talked about their learning, I thought, A, they were brilliant. I think, B, they really demonstrated to us that learning needs to happen in a lot of different ways. And so what we've sort of seen is that there's a lot of good thinking about how are we really going to get to the 40-40-20. And what we know is that some of this work will continue, some of the work's passing policies, but some of this work we know will become concepts that eventually we will need to send off as recommendation to the governor, so the governor can decide ultimately which ones get funded and to what degree. I think you all remember when the governor said to us, we need to budget a plan, not plan a budget. And by budget the plan, what he's talking about is I need a group like the OEIB who has subcommittees who also go out and work with partners, and there's other governmental agencies that are working too, like Accelerated Learning is not a subcommittee of OEIB, but it has legislators and educators on it who are thinking about accelerated learning. So through all of this work with the OEIB and the subcommittees and working with partners like COSA or our culturally specific organizations, we've come up with what we think are three really overarching outcomes, concepts, and within that, we've put strategies that we think are integrated, that we think collectively will also move students along the pathway. So with that, I wanted to just talk a little bit more with that as overarching, what has happened with the Outcome and Investment Subcommittee. They've met many times, like all these other committees. I'm just so impressed by the amount of work, professionalism, deep thinking that all of the committees have brought in. But they've met many times. And after all their hard work, they did come up with this, what we're referring to is constructive, comprehensive strategies. Now, in addition to that, what has happened is what you'll see, there's been these 29 concepts that have been moved into these policies, to these strategies. And Peter will go over, there are some concepts that didn't move in, because we had to really figure out which ones do we think could leverage the most for students, which ones need some deeper thinking, some of them are within the package, and which ones right now are just not ready to continue in the package. And so we did all of that work. Now, after we kind of started thinking about that work, we said we've passed an equity lens. The equity lens is critical. It is a policy that should guide everything we did. So we took all of these proposals and we looked at them through the equity lens. And we really tried to say, for all of our students in Oregon, which of the proposals are we looking at will really create the kind of equitable outcomes for students that we really want our students to have. So that was another step that we went through. And then after that, we said, what concepts really align together to leverage each other, not to just sit alone, but to leverage each other. So that's what we've done up to this point. Peter's going to show you the concepts we believe, and what I want you to know is what we're looking for is recommendations from you to say that we really support this integrated conceptual package and the strategies that go along with it. And if we get your approval on doing that, not this time, but next time, this is the first reading, then that goes off to the governor, and the governor is the one to decide how to get it funded, which ones ultimately get funded. Now, he'll work with all the agencies, with people like me and Ben and Rob and Megan. We'll all work together to think about that, but ultimately it is the governor who's going to budget the plan. It is us that are providing the vision, the plan, the key directions, and the strategy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who is going to start sharing our 3 packages with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Golden, members of the OEIB. It's a pleasure to be able to work with you today. And I made notes on what I was going to say about the process, and Nancy hit every single one of them but 2. So thank you very much for that introduction. One note is that I appreciate that Equity and Partnerships worked for 26 hours. We actually did 26 hours in one day because the Outcomes and Investments folks really. I do want to harken back to where you first heard about this effort. And it was a presentation by Nancy and then Whitney Grubbs a number of months ago. It was a long policy document and then a handout that set the stage for coming up with these investments. And one way to think of that start was it was an analytical approach to budgeting. Whitney and the staff looked at the budgeting and sort of divided up into categories, and that's where we started. And as we went through the process, we have received a tremendous amount of input. And I'd say that we're part of the way through that. There's still work to do. What's been most powerful about the process as a facilitator is this has gone from an analytic process to a synthetic one. Things have come together. Members of the Outcomes and Investments Committee from the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission and the Early Learning Council have added their thinking and their grouping knowledge to the work that we were doing to produce something that really is more than what we started with. Unfortunately, when you have a synthetic process, you end up changing things around, and what you start with is not necessarily what you end with. So the handouts that you have and the grid that goes along with them, this Outcomes and Investment Matrix, needs a little bit of explanation, because where we started has been informed greatly by the people who've participated. So what I was thinking I would do is I would walk you through the handouts, defining specific elements of those handouts and things to call your attention to, and then really step back and allow there to be questions or discussions back and forth on the key questions that Dr. Golden raised when we started. And then we'll see after that if there's more work to do, if we're done for our first reading. So first off, there's 3 color handouts that folks have, and if you're in the audience, I think you have black and white. These 3 handouts are entitled Pathway to Kindergarten Readiness and 3rd Grade Reading, Pathway to High School and Post-Secondary Completion, and Pathways Connecting Education to Careers. These did not exist the last time you folks met and heard this presentation. You saw different groupings. You actually saw 4 or 5 different groupings. This is the result of a lot of concerted effort by the members of the committee to clarify, again, as Dr. Golden said before, where are these really aligning? Where is their leverage? Where is their strategies that really fit together? And as a result of that discussion, we've really ended up with 3 outcome-based concepts that have strategies within them. Starting with Pathway to Kindergarten Readiness and 3rd Grade Reading, to be honest with you, we went back and forth about, is this really 2 things? Is it really a pathway to kindergarten and then a pathway to 3rd grade reading? And where we ended was 1, but it's really not meant to hold kindergarten readiness or third grade reading as being separate or subsume one in another. The two are really equally important. If you're not ready by kindergarten, the amount of work and effort it takes for students to be ready by third grade is enormous. So it's critical that we focus on all of the effort with early learning to get the highest percentage of kids possible ready by kindergarten. And as a matter of fact, for a lot of our early learning partners, whether they be education providers from Oregon Health Authority or health providers, or from Department of Human Services or social service providers, that focus on kindergarten readiness really does resonate with folks who take care of 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. The ages and stages questionnaire that a lot of us parents fill out when our kids are seeing the pediatrician are critical to predicting third grade readiness. But we've combined the two of them for a very important reason, which is that we don't want to lose sight of the fact, and this does connect very, very well with everything we heard about the reading campaign, that ultimately what we're focusing on is a benchmark in public schools like no other, which is third grade reading. Because by 4th grade, you need to read to learn. And if you're not prepared and we're not aligned to third grade reading, we've really failed the kids of Oregon. So it's not to devalue kindergarten, not to hold it aside. It's the important critical benchmark. But all of us have to have sights on third grade reading. And there's no time that's too early to begin reading with your kids, singing to your kids, telling stories, even before they're born. So it's one concept that really synthesizes two, we think, in a meaningful way. There may be discussions by members of the committee about that thinking. Underneath that, the bulleted points really reiterate what I've just said out loud. Right below that, there's outcome measures. You probably ask, why is that blank? Some of you saw that's previously filled in. And the only reason it's blank right now is we are just about to receive the state assessment scores for third grade reading. We'll populate that current state assessment scores, and then we'll put our 2- and 4-year goals in that box the next time you see it in October. But those will be populated with a very specific goal regarding how students are going to finish, and not just the all students, but actually the disaggregated groups of students as well. And then finally, the bottom third of the sheet are the key strategies that have come forward, the scope of the strategies in terms of number of students or staff affected. And then the last part, and I don't think folks have seen this before on the committee, is a way for someone who maybe is not as enmeshed in the work as everyone else to see where these strategies really get their leverage, where they're making the biggest difference. So for example, when you look at early years to kindergarten, and you see that there's a check in collective impact, because that's early learning hubs. And the driving idea of the early learning hubs is collective neighborhood and community impact, similar to the third grade reading. And so the idea there, this is not absolutely exclusive. It's quite possible that for a number of these you could put a check in every box, because to some degree they hit on every one of these. This is meant to identify at their essence, these strategies do these 2 or 3 things, just to keep it straight in our minds what the strategies are exactly. And then underneath it, we've defined what does essential skills, collective impact, educator effectiveness, quality learning environments, and system redesign mean. The format for the second and third of these is identical, and I don't know if it's best for you to get me just talking about all 3, or if it's better to stop with each one. And my feeling is it's probably better to stop with each outcome and then ask questions. So before I do, I just want to point out the companion document that you received as the meeting began is a matrix that is a much more succinct and analyzed version of what was originally presented to the outcomes and investment. You have the name of the investment, you have a brief description, and you have our equity analysis. And because there was confusion about the documents that we've had, the way this is set up is each of these outcome-based strategies have a section of the matrix that goes in exactly the same order as the handout with exactly the same name that's on the handout. So we're not confused about kind of which page we're on. And as we get into our discussion, if I need to, I can refer to a page number. And I do want to highlight one more thing about this that Dr. Golden referred to. There are a few concepts that are not in the final product. They are identified in the back of this document as not included. And on the very last page, there's actually some notes about some of these concepts. And as we go through them, you'll see that some of the concepts that are included actually came up at the Outcomes Investment Subcommittee or through the Accelerated Learning Committee or through some other route. So we may end up turning back and forth in this document. And please, if I'm going too quickly and you're not clear on where we are, raise your hand, because as any good teacher will tell you, if you've got this question, so do 3 other people on the committee and probably half the audience. So stop me if there's something that's not clear. And so what I'd like to do is pause and see if there are questions, because in the end we're going to ask your support on this in a month. If there's questions about the whole grouping, and then questions about the individual items.
So what you're going to be asking us in a month is, once it's been populated, that we're approving the key strategies. Is that what the question is going to be a month from now?
What I wrote down, and Nancy, maybe you want to reply, but I just wrote down what Nancy said. So I heard, do you support the integrated concept packages that we present? And then within those concepts, do you support strategies? And if you don't, what would you need in order to support them?
Let me say it a little differently.
Thank you.
I think what we have was 27, I don't know what it is now. But, you have 20-some strategies which you could just view as individual initiatives. But we grouped them in ways that we said we think makes a lot more sense that, the 2 and 2 equals 5 kind of thing, if you group them right and work them. So we ended up from a list that, I don't know, was 100 and something, coming up with 27 that we decided were priorities, and then grouped them into these 3 categories and are presenting them as a package. You can do endless debates about, take this one out, put that one in, sort of a thing, and we did have those endless debates and came out here. But that's what it is, basically a package of things that group them. There are, I'll stop, there's so many questions about, why this, not that,
Yeah.
and so forth. That's the package.
And I think the only other frame I would put on it is, as we look at this, it's, do we think these outcomes with these strategies will move the dial on the outcomes on the achievement compacts? Will it really get at students ready for kindergarten, reading proficiently at 3rd grade, the 5th grade, you know what I mean? So it's all along the pathway. So that's really what we're trying to do. We adopted achievement compacts with the outcomes that we think are going to leverage kids successfully to college and career. And so do these packets of concepts really, will they help move us there?
Well, they help, and we used it, this should be very clear, we used it as a bit of a filter. Something was
Yeah.
a good idea, but it didn't fit one of these 3.
Right.
It didn't make the list.
Right.
We were saying,
Right.
25 random things that address 25 random issues is not very effective. Let's figure out what's against these 3.
Right.
And other things may be good ideas, but we don't have the time or resources
Right.
to pursue every good idea.
Exactly.
I'm just looking at the legend on the last page on 15, and what might be something to add, consider our current strategic initiatives. We've invested $75 million, and some of the receiving entities didn't receive that till very late the 2nd year of the biennium. We really haven't had a time to ascertain whether they've been successful, but we invested initially $75 million. And I think it behooves us to consider the ones that are having momentum and success, that we're reinvesting in those the second time. I don't see that on here.
Thank you for that.
So one thing on the the format that would be helpful. So I like that there's a number of students now versus the earlier iterations. One thing, though, you can't tell unless you know how large the set is whether this is a subset or all students. So for example, 9th grade on track, is that just a subset of 9th graders who are off track that we're focusing on, or is it all 9th graders who are off track? Again, it just gives us a sense of how the scale of what we're...
And the scope, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is concept or not, but I'm just thinking of the vehicles for implementation. For instance, many of these are hub activities. It would be the vehicle for the hub. The hub would be the vehicle. Some of these are rack activities. Again, we had a lot of investment in those initially. We just might want to consider what the vehicle is for the transformation.
The only question I have about that is the regions of the state that don't have a rack or that as a pathway.
Well, I think that's why we talk about that and see whether or not it's a statewide thing or if it's a regional centered thing. At least have the conversations more on that, Julie.
And we have done an analysis. We have a map that shows exactly where there isn't any area where no service is happening through a rack or a hub or things like that. So we could show that too.
Should I move on to the second one? Is that
we had a comment.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Peter, I think the one general comment is kind of the elephant in the room is that the Oregon process doesn't put dollars. We don't know what the dollars are. This frustrated the group a little bit, but that's not our process here in Oregon. So this is what we think is interesting. Outcomes and investments, the chicken and an egg. Investments for outcomes, outcomes for investments.
I do want to contrast this to the process of not strategically putting them together first and coming up at the 11th hour when it's just based on numbers. I think there's been such value, and I think Ron addressed it, at that process of winnowing out things that don't fit into groups.
Exactly. Dave had a comment, Peter.
Yeah, I also agree. I think putting the scope, the number of students in there is really good. And hope we start getting to the point that with all these priorities that we're talking about, we start talking about scope, number of students served, things like amount of investment, how it moves the scale on equity, how's it affecting completions, maybe what are short-term, long-term goals. It'd be really helpful as we're talking about priorities and we're going ahead, that we have that framework for everything. And I do have a concern about the one on connecting education to careers. I can understand the outcome measure, number of graduates employed in STEM fields. It's getting a lot of press, hearing that from a lot of employers. I'm just not sure if number of graduates employed in their field of study really makes sense. I mean, I don't know how many people in this room are employed directly in their field of study, for example. So I don't know if that's a real, I think that sometimes making too much the link between higher education as being directly only career training for a specific career field. And I think we should find another outcome measure that's
David, I take an exception to that there is no bachelor degree in these car sales.
okay. Well,
Thank you.
my point exactly. Thank you.
Mercifully, right? One other comment too, just for the board to consider, is we have an action item for modifications to the achievement compacts. So as we look at the strategic investments, what we're going to take action on, if approved, are a much simpler achievement compact and some changes at higher ed as well. I just want to put that in the back of your mind as you have this conversation.
Good point.
So if we could just want to address the high school and post-secondary completion, the second handout. Its format is the same as the first. It has many more key strategies on it, and that's because that's a longer span of time between basically third grade all the way up through post-secondary. And one thing I want to note for everyone is at no point along the way did the committee believe that any Oregonian should see themselves in only one of these. They should see themselves in all of these. Everyone needs to be prepared to be college and career ready. Everyone needs to see a pathway all the way through post-secondary completion. Everyone needs to have that connection to career. It's not a one or the other. And on the key strategies, you'll notice as you scan down, and actually especially if you look in the handout, the voluminous matrix that we produced, some of the key strategies, again, this gets to what Ron was saying before, some of the key strategies emerged as we talked at the Outcomes and Investments Committee about the bucket. We call these buckets, sorry, and not just outcome-based things, buckets. So we would say things like, well, what's not in this bucket? And one thing that wasn't in the bucket was math. And the issues with math were some that we've heard today about alignment between K-12 and higher ed. And also it was about how math's taught. Is it engaging? Are students really interested in it? And we know it's a barrier. For many students, it's the reason they don't graduate high school, or the reason they don't get an advanced degree, or the reason they don't go into STEM. Even if the STEM field doesn't really require math in the career, there's a barrier. Anyway, so in the discussion, this idea of math alignment and instructional redesign emerged. And it's still on that list because it was a strong feeling by the members of that committee, which included higher ed coordinating commission representative, that was something that was missing. And it was really compelling to have that come up within the context of a proposal instead of having it come up another way. So there are other ones of these that sort of have a similar parentage. For instance, dual credit comes from Accelerated Learning Committee. That's the group that's working on that. Hilda Rosselli is staff to that. Dr. Golden is the chair. That is an effort that we're not deciding yes or no on, but it should be on this piece of paper because it's directly in line with this notion that students who get college credit in a high school tend to graduate high school more frequently and finish community college or college more frequently. So even though we didn't come up with the idea, it should be there. And there's some others in all these handouts that kind of have come from other places. So I just want to identify the lineage of some of these things that were unpredictable from where we started to where we've ended. So I'll stop talking and ask if there's questions about the high school and post-secondary completion. A lot of discussion about the strategies came up at our meeting, about the funding formula change for ELL, the ninth grade on track. We talked at the equity committee at length about higher education affordability. I don't think there's a single strategy on here that's totally ready for prime time. They all need continued effort, and I think that's important for us to get that feedback so we can make them as solid as possible before they're implemented. And I appreciate members who've already given feedback on those, but I'll stop talking. No questions? Okay.
So I of course.
Yes.
The personal achievement record, that connects to the longitudinal database, which is required in statute.
Right.
Are we having is there a category for things that we're required to do that it's not really an optional thing because it was part of the legislation 909 creating it?
This is the only one that I know of that's in statute. That's not something that we're doing currently. And what's in statute is a state longitudinal data system, and I presented on that to you all, and you voted for that. Inside of that proposal that we wrote is this idea of a personal achievement record, so it's sort of a subset of it, and it's meant to be a guide and a help to students as they complete these pathways. So it was called out, again, by members of the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee as something that should be reflected on the sheet, even though it's going to happen anyway.
And then this is a question maybe for Ben, and you can tell me whether I should do this offline.
Okay.
For Ben Cannon, the higher education affordability and the higher education productivity, are those resources focused on students who are entering community college or OUS without need for remediation? Or is it based on need and they have a high school diploma?
Yeah, so I'll take them in turn. So the higher education affordability recommendation is principally a recommendation for investment in the Oregon Opportunity Grant in order to more fully fund remaining need based on full cost of attendance and expected family contribution, contributions from the student body work for a targeted set of higher education students. Exactly how that targeting would be done is still something that the HAC in consultation with others is doing. It seems very unlikely that we would have the resources to be able to make that sort of pledge of true affordability for all students. So it's an open question. The higher education productivity recommendation is a recommendation for additional state investment in institutions in order to help them, support them in their transition to taking advantage of the funding allocation changes that the HEC is currently designing. These are formula changes to more clearly incentivize student support by allocating resources on the basis of completion, not just enrollment. And the expectation, the request, or recommendation on the part of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission is that additional state investment is necessary in order to help migrate to the new funding formula. So, which we think will produce better results, but not specifically focused on students who don't require remediation.
So I think the answer was there's not a filter of that for either one. Of course, the first one was not yet been developed, and the second was no.
That's right. So applying the particular filter you described is not something that has been taken under consideration or discussion as we've developed these proposals.
Other questions from the?
Yeah, you raise a good point, Julia, because the HEC didn't really talk about developmental ed and how it applied to it. It really talked about focusing on at least getting the first 2 years of students through college and university as a focus. But like Ben said, it haven't worked out a lot of the specifics of that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at, so where is the incentive in the system for the community colleges or OUS to be working with the K-12 system so that the student, it's not the student who gets caught in this gap?
Hilda, do you want to, I know we've had a committee really working on that, a developmental ed committee. So do you want to speak a minute to that?
So if we could,
or Ben, do you want to?
Well, I'll address both, and of course, Hilda as well. But the productivity investment, as we look at shifting the way that the state allocates state dollars to community colleges in particular, one of the recommendations under consideration is to, for an outcome that would be a part of the basis for the funding formula, would be success in developmental ed. So colleges would be rewarded partly on the basis of their success in student completion in developmental ed, not just student enrollment in developmental ed. It's sort of the classic enrollment versus completion question where we're hoping to accelerate student progress and provide support to institutions to accelerate student progress through developmental ed. So there is a relationship there, I think.
Well, I guess I want to remove the incentive for community colleges to have kids in developmental ed if they've successfully completed a high school education in Oregon.
Which gets to the credit by proficiency pathway, the Eastern Promise.
We're setting a higher standard.
Exactly. That I'd like.
Or some sort of coordination.
Well, the 11 through 14 is all about that coordination. I think Eastern Promise was one of the things that got the community colleges to work with K-12 to say, what's the standard? Do we believe a student needs to be successful? If that's the standard, what will demonstrate that standard? So what test, what performance, how do we work together? So whether they get it in high school or at the college, it's the same thing. And how do we collectively score them so that we know it really means that they're career and college ready and that the community college professor would say yes and the K-12 person would say yes. I want to say with the developmental ed, and I can talk to that because I know that one too, because I'm pretty excited about it. It's not just about, part of the proposal is, from HEC, is thinking about rewarding the kids who are out, but it's really about redoing developmental ed totally. So for example, a similar thing in K-12 is response to intervention, or a program like that where you create different structures. So a student might not need to go into developmental ed, but they're getting the support in the regular ed class to be successful. So what you see at some universities is you say, we're not going to do developmental ed the way we used to. They're going to go in a regular class, but they have an extra lab, or they have an extra study skill, or a small group with the instructor, or with a graduate student that really supports them, so that when they're in the regular program, they're absolutely successful in that. So part of the developmental ed is to really look at how do we kind of shift that structure so students will be successful. But the first thing, of course, is making sure they're just right on track when they leave high school to go to college.
I see that's the big opportunity, is that group of kids who are graduating with thinking they met the standard, and then...
Well, we got to face the fact, Julie, about prerequisites. And I can show you some data right now that kids, especially underserved kids, they don't get through the gateway of a compass or an acuplacer. You put them in those college classes and they perform. And we saw that with 2 examples here today. That we also have to fundamentally look at ourselves philosophically on prerequisites and gatekeeping and keeping kids out of classes.
Well, that's exactly what the question I think
Yeah,
we
I know
should
it
be
is. That's
asking.
what-
And
that's what I'm saying.
I just guess before we are putting more money into the institutions, that to be asked those institutions that question about the gatekeeping and having kids being put in classes that they think they've already passed, based on the standards that have been set in our high schools.
So there's some very exciting work that I know Hilda or I would love to describe to the relevant committee. I think some of it has been presented to best practices around ways in which the developmental ed gatekeeping courses, especially in math, are being redesigned in the interest of supporting more students to high school and college completion and readiness for work. I think there's increased understanding among higher education institutions that in math, the college algebra to calculus approach is not necessary for all or even most degrees. It has been the standard, and I'm very happy to say we have 4 and 2-year institutions very actively working on alternative pathways to degree. So I think it's a longer conversation, and getting the high school connection as well. It's not reflected, I will just to answer your question directly, Julia, it's not reflected in these recommendations specifically. It is work underway.
And in addition to that, there's conversations about if a student passes the ACT in high school, shouldn't that mean that they don't need to go into developmental ed in college? That passing says, yes, they're ready. So all of these are things we're working on. That's part of all the things we're doing to assure we have completion and that students can move right into college without needing developmental ed. So we could certainly present that stuff to the committee, because
Elizabeth has already texted and said she'd be delighted to present that work.
it'd be great to share that work. Thank you, Helen.
I think sharing that work very soon to this group, because I think it impacts this investment.
So we could try to get that for the next meeting, because this is not a decision this time, so that would be great.
First reading.
But can I just check, was that something the committee would like to see on this investment somewhere reflected more explicitly? The whole board? I don't know.
I would. Okay. I see some head nodding. Okay. Anna, you're up.
So as we look at what's expected, I think we've adopted a common core state standards. So I would hope that through our work with the RACs, that we actually get some high school educators involved in that work so that they could communicate, because that articulation is absolutely important. But at this moment in time, I think we have very, very few actual practitioners that are engaged in the rec work, and I hope that we can get that moving so that they are talking about. Because if we really believe that the standards are what educators are being held accountable for, then there has to be a connection between college standards and these Common Core standards and how we're going to make that jump, or else we're all in trouble, and every educator is going to be wasting a whole lot of time. Ben, I've asked repeatedly for this. We're looking at changing how we fund higher ed. And I've asked, so can you give me an example of what a community college president is going to do differently when we say, we're going to give you money based on completion versus enrollment? I'm still confused about where we think there's any leverage that we're actually going to see student achievement increase.
So I'd be happy to give a taste of an answer now and to follow up with more information. States that have gone down the path of allocating state resources partly on the basis, or in some cases, mostly on the basis of outcomes, report seeing changed institutional behavior in response to those changes, especially in the ways that institutions are able to provide more support for students around guidance, counseling, mentoring, course availability, in order to try to clear those bottlenecks and support more students to a degree. The way that our system allocates state resources to both community colleges and universities today primarily puts the incentive around enrollment. That's compounded, of course, by the fact that tuition is a major basis of, the major basis for institutional support, and that, of course, is also an enrollment-based mechanism. So institutions respond to those types of incentives. So our conversations with state leaders and institutional leaders from other states that have gone down this path suggest, and it's early days in this as we look nationally in this sort of in this work, but there are a number of states, maybe a third of them, that are quite a bit farther along in this than Oregon, that institutions have changed their own resource allocation patterns in order to more clearly focus on student success. So that's the body of evidence that's beginning to emerge. And like I say, I'd be happy to follow up with some of the specific examples and ways in which community college leaders here have described their interest in supporting student success, that had gone out and asked not precisely the question that they're asking, but the question of what would you do with more resources to support students? And we got a lot of pretty exciting, compelling answers of ways in which they would make those investments.
That's a totally different question what you just said. What would you do with more money? Because what I'm hearing is this isn't new money. This is the same money that's being repurposed. So when you ask that question, well, of course, if I had more money, I could create all kinds of things that I do to help students succeed. So I would love, and we can do it offline, but I really would like to get some information on this and to better understand what we're looking at, because I'm not seeing the path to real change. I'm seeing the path that's moving the deck chairs around a little bit.
So can I just clarify the proposal, since that's what's before us? This is an investment request. It's a request for investment. The HEC proposals for significant new investments in our colleges and universities. It is not enough to agree that the HEC agrees that merely reallocating existing resources to our colleges and universities will not move the needle for students. What's proposed in the higher education productivity strategy is both new investments in institutions and a corresponding HEC work on changes to those allocation patterns in order to support institutions in supporting students towards completion.
Ben, would you still support a more outcomes-based approach if it was with the same level of investment? Or do you need additional investment in order to go this route?
The fact that the state of Oregon today is spending the same, roughly the same in higher education as it did in 1999 in non-inflation adjusted dollars, despite 50% increases in enrollment. Suggests to us there has been, tells us that there has been a pretty rapid constriction of higher education budgets in this state, and that's reflected in a lot of ways. I think partly as a result, the commission that I work with would be unlikely to support merely reallocating existing dollars. But it says that it really needs to be both. It needs to be new dollars and it needs to be dollars that are allocated differently.
Cool.
Sure. I just wanted to take a moment and just reflect on how little time we typically spend talking about good investment into higher ed, and just put my full support behind additional new dollars going to this. If you consider the inflation that Ben mentioned, and also the pressure that this full board and the equity committee has repeatedly put on higher ed to increase the number of Oregonian students that we serve and the diversity of students that we serve, and the repeated requests and pressure to improve on outcomes, I think that we have to live up to our end of the bargain. I've actually heard Hannah reference this many times. We can't just put additional requirements and pressure and not bring resources, and so I just want to say for the record that I think it's very important that we support this additional investment.
Dick?
Yes, sometimes I'd like to hear the difference on the philosophy on completion. It isn't the California model with community college. The JC model is really alignment with the university system, whereas the Oregon system, at least in the history, has been vocational. And so we have to be careful, and this is maybe a discussion outside of here right now, but what the heck is that someone could come into a community college, learn how to weld, and he's gone, and he hasn't completed, but yet he's got a great paying job. So then we have to be careful that our model here has been really vocational as much as, actually we're the hybrid. We do both vocational and alignment. So that's a whole different ballgame here. So when it makes, I know in a community college in my hometown, completion is not necessarily the end-all goal. It's getting a job and changing your, that type of thing.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear, because that wasn't what I understood off the PowerPoint. It was changing the formula, the way that you distribute money for the money that is current and an additional investment. Is that correct, or are you saying that all current funds would be allocated as they are and new funds would help change the system?
We've not determined, the HEC does not have a recommendation about what proportion or what portions of the funds would be subject to a new allocation methodology. That's ongoing deliberation with the institutions. The proposal here is, though is for both. It is for the additional dollars and some new methodology for reallocation of a portion or the entirety. That question of how much, is it 100%, is it 25%, is it 50%, is one that for neither community colleges or the public university formulas has been decided in a way that we would have a recommendation of.
Okay, Peter?
That's it. That's all we want to do is take input. So if there are any other questions, we've taken input. We're available, obviously, to be contacted by email or by phone, and we'll be preparing a presentation for October for decision.
Several people have commented about offline a little bit here, and I think that might be relevant. Is there a way to get this in a Word document that we could just put comments in the boxes?
I'd be happy to email it out to the board with Seth's assistance. So.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, as always.
Okay.
Moving right along now, Personnel Management Subcommittee. Julia.
Yes, so reporting on behalf of the committee, Dick Ricknell, Kay Tran, and myself. The board approved a outline or a process for the evaluation of the chief education officer. We're moving through that process. We tentatively have a subcommittee meeting scheduled in mid to late September. to discuss and formulate a report to the full board. What's going to go into that? We have a self-reflection from Dr. Golden, survey results from community members. I think we have a 80 to 90% staff participation rate. For those of you on the board, the third of you who haven't turned in your forms yet, please do so in the next week, because that's the one component that we don't yet have. We're just waiting for some guidance from DOJ, since this is the first time we've been through this process of what's in the public record and what's not. And we should, after our meeting, have a draft report for the whole board. So that's so one piece of our work. The second piece of the subcommittee's work relates to the sort of sideboards or guardrails we put in around training around ethics, travel, procurement, public records, and just report to the full board that all staff members have taken all the required trainings in the 4 primary areas that we identified. So that's all been done. That's it. Unless, Dick, do you have anything you want to add?
Great, thanks.
Any questions, comments for Juliet? Thank you.
Mark?
Yes, ma'am.
There were 2 questions for the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee that you didn't go to.
Which question?
Okay.
What didn't we get to?
Are you in support of the way the outcomes strategies are grouped, and what additional information do you need that we're going to?
Sure, we can go back to that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear.
I heard a lot of requests for additional information. Peter, you could go over them, or I could go over them.
That might be Peter.
That's an alarm. I was supposed to call someone yesterday. I don't know why. I was supposed to call the governor, and I didn't want to miss it, so I apologize.
Yesterday, though, then?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to call him. No, I called him yesterday. I apologize. So maybe you could go over what you heard people wanted. I also have a list of that.
Is that the request?
Well, basically,
More information.
we took general feedback, general questions, but what Hannah is pointing to are the specific questions on our commentary that say, are you in support of the way the outcome strategies are grouped? What additional information do you need? So following up on those specific questions is where she was.
Right, so thank you very much. I think the conversation got so detailed and interesting as I may have lost the forest for the trees, so sorry about that. So the first question on that is, are folks in, and we're not calling the question right now, but I guess we're asking if folks have a different way that they might suggest that these be grouped, or, I just want to make sure
Why don't we just take a leaning? It's not a vote, but does the grouping make sense to you? I mean, we've got, again, I'm seeing Dick. Okay, I'm seeing head shake. Okay, so I've seen everybody shake their head that the groupings make sense. So that's just a leaning. Do you need more information other than what we wrote down here? I mean, I've heard we want someone to come and present about developmental ed. I've heard that that we also want to think about any we need more information and want to think about, like Eastern Promise, some of the 35. I mean, these were kind of questions.
There was also the issue of, on the scope, being clear about not just the number, but does that represent all students, all staff, or parts? That's one thing
So that's
that I
one
heard.
we have to bring back. We've also heard, what's the vehicle? We'd like to know. So
Right.
to me, this means more information. We'd like to know, what's the vehicle? Was it the hubs? Is it the rack? Which communities don't have any of those? So that was another thing. I also heard we'd like to know which ones are, we'd like more information about which ones are short-term, which ones are long-term. Did you get others, Peter?
I did. Also on the pathway connecting education to career, David had mentioned this number of graduates employed in their field of study. Probably isn't the measure we want, because plenty of folks are unemployed in their field. And I think the key idea is that they're prepared for a career that they're satisfied with.
Right.
So we have to work on some metric that tries to capture that better.
Good catch.
Some more? So that's a good question, Hannah. Any other more information that people need?
It's a clarifying question, and this has come up repeatedly, and it sounded like at one point if we were going to get information later, but when we had the joint equity and partnership with the outcomes committee meeting, the answer on the how much does it cost was, well, that will come later. So I guess I'm curious, will we ever get that? Will there ever be a column of like, here's the cost per student, or of if you're doing this scope, here's what it costs? Or are we just going to say, here are 3 groupings of sets of strategies, and it's up to the governor?
Yeah, so I think what was said at the end of our last meeting is if you're asking us to sort of recommend big concepts in a package, we can do that. In our conversations with the governor, partly what my call was yesterday when we spoke, is really that we're recommending to him strategies in core concepts, and then he is the one who has to plan the budget. Now, along the way, as he goes through his process of presenting his budget, as we go through the legislative process, certainly they'll start to become numbers, but that will go on later. So our job's recommending kind of the plan, and then his job's to see how he can fund the plan.
Ken?
And this is where I need more information to understand how we're going to do this. Because in the last go-around, we made some proposals. There were 10 strategic initiatives, and then all of a sudden this was what we were doing and the amount of money out there. Where was that money coming from? Was it more important? Is there anything that's happening within the state school fund right now that should be supplanted by some of these initiatives that we have before us now? Is the answer yes or no? You can't just decide that you're going to add 24, 27 new things in a budget if you're not going to take things off the plate or add more money. So we already know right now that there's policy to add full-day kindergarten, which is about $220 million, without counting any capital costs that are going to be incurred along the way as well. So as we look at all of these great ideas, and I really appreciate, there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. I would ask that we do some more outreach to parents, students, and educators to really make sure that what's in here is going to move the dial before we start implementing. But if we don't have these prioritized and we don't really talk about this is something that we would take off the plate, then where's that conversation going to happen? Because we haven't really engaged in that. So as a board, if we're going to take a position and say, these are the 24 things, 27, however you want to look at it, items, then I want to make sure that we understand what's coming off the plate. Because a couple years ago, what came off the plate was librarians in several districts around the state because we invested in other things. We didn't have the funds. So if reading is a priority, would we want to do that again? What's going to come off if we do this is the question I think we have to struggle with a little bit. Or we have to get down to the point where we talk about, as the investment board, are we really going to start talking about truly investing and what it would take to have the schools that are outlined in the quality education? That would be the conversation worth having.
So I think the scope of this group is to suggest direct investments, to suggest grouped integrated strategies that then go to the governor. And I having been in Danny's position once, and before we had the OEIB, we didn't have all these good committees recommending these good things around outcomes. So the decisions about budgets were made much more in isolation. They weren't as informed as having a HEC who's giving us really important work, having all these subcommittees, and so really what the governor wants is to say, we need people to help us think about the best things with budget. And then I think we have to trust the governor, me, Danny, Rob, Ben, as agency people working with legislators to really figure out which of these are going to get funded and how do we get them funded. And of course, when the governor is thinking about his budget, he's also thinking about what's the money that goes out to organizations. I'll tell you, just if Rob and I, we all get together as a team, and maybe we look in ODE and we say, is there anything that ODE might be able to fund in here? Just that process alone, for us to sit around and do that, is going to take hours. It's begun to take hours. So this is a policy group that gives us a pathway, that gives us an idea of what are some of the key strategies that can leverage, but it's not the group who decides how to fund it, because that is hours and hours of agency, governor, legislative work. But you're all part of that process. I mean, you can testify at any legislative session. The governor will present his budget. You can give input about that. So it's just a process down the road, but we definitely will go out and talk to people about these. That's why we're coming out early with them. Definitely during legislative session, people will be testifying on things, and so all that work's going to be done, but it's down the road.
Ultimately, is this an accurate assessment, Nancy, that the way this is packaged, that came out of the Outcomes and Investment Committee, who put in many hours, this is the way it's packaged, what the governor wants as he puts together his budget?
Yeah, he wants a sense of a plan that will help him really get so we can meet 40-40-20 by 2025 and meet the outcomes, and he wants that to be an informed plan by a board and subcommittees. And a lot of these proposals were worked on not just in here. I think about the reading equity. We had community leaders from all over the state who have moved the needle on third grade reading come together. These people reflected the faces of the children in the state, and they had all-day meetings to really come up with a recommendation. So these committees were working on them, the HEC was working on them, Early Learning's been working on it, outside committees have been working on it, other government committees have been working on it, to give a vision, a plan to the governor so that he can budget a plan. I mean, I guess I just want to say, in my experience as a leader, if we didn't have a vision of where we wanted to go, if as a superintendent, if I didn't know what I wanted my buildings to look like, there's no way I could have asked my community to help me with that. If I didn't know that I needed an alternative school, an arts and academic school for kids who were dropping out, there's no way I could have applied for a Gates grant that got the money to start that. So this is really about what are the strategies we believe are going to move the dial, and can we really provide guidance to a governor who deeply wants to make sure we meet 40-40-20 by 2025.
Okay, any questions on, we went back to outcomes and investments, any questions, final thoughts on that? Okay, so we had Julia's report, so we'll move to item number 4. Peter, why don't you just stay right up here?
Yep, I will.
Okay.
Again, Peter Tromba, Oregon Education Investment Board. You saw at our planning meeting, our all-day planning meeting, the recommendation from staff regarding the achievement compacts moving forward into our next year. And as a result of that meeting, there have been some slight changes to what's recommended before you. I'd like to go over them with you and then call the question, be able to move, hopefully move forward on implementation of these recommendations. First off, I want to note that after the meeting, I've received pretty much no negative comments, a number of comments about things to change a little bit or that deepened my understanding, and I'll go over that a little bit. But from whether it's K-12, community college, or university, a real resonance in the recommendations here with the experience of people on the ground. Specifically, one-year goals don't make sense, too many goals don't make sense, and some of the timeline doesn't really fit with how we budget. So I offer these to you, and I could mention some of the people who've come forward, but I'd like to just assert that the field sees this as a very positive step with regard to the OEIB and its relationship with individual districts, institutions, both at community college and at higher ed. One of the things that came up at the meeting that folks asked is, well, what would have to change in law or statute? So what's different about these recommendations than what you saw before is I've noted if there needs to be a change in law or statute. And honestly, for the most part, there doesn't need to be a change in law or statute, but there's at least one place where it does. So let me go through the recommendations. Number one, reduce school district, community college, and public university reporting requirements and make the process more integrated, meaningful, and actionable. So A, goal setting in 1 or 2 focus areas only. In the K-12, we've identified in this recommendation those 2 focus areas are 3rd grade reading proficiency and 5-year high school completion. At community college and post-secondary, that's still a work in progress. It's been a very engaging opportunity to meet with folks at the community college and university around these metrics. They're not as settled as they are at K-12. So while there is discussion of a productivity metric, as Ben has mentioned before, it's not identified yet. But we are signaling to community colleges and higher ed that although the metrics that they have as part of their achievement compact are important, we're looking for them to prioritize around a couple. And that has resonated really, really well with higher ed. I do want to note, however, as much as we have captured the issues that are coming up for K-12 and higher ed, I've been made aware of some language that we used in the Achievement Compact recommendations that actually doesn't necessarily resonate well with higher education. For instance, there's a distinction between a community college and a community college district. And in some of our language in the recommendation, I've been told we need to tweak that a little bit. Doesn't really substantially change the recommendations, but it's been some feedback I've received. Similarly, there are places in the report where we refer to the HEC, and people are not sure, do we mean the agency, or do we mean the elected, or do we mean the board? And so there's some substantive changes to some of the language that don't really change the recommendations that I have received in the last week that would change a little bit about how this document is written, but not about the recommendations. So I just want to mention that. So 1B, a 3-year goal with theories of action. A theory of action is just a nice highfalutin way of saying, how are you going to get to your goal? What's your plan? How have you budgeted your plan? 3-year goals, because 1-year goals have made no sense. 1-year goals have turned this idea of setting out a course and changed it into predicting where we're going to be next year. And I think we talked about that at some length in 2 previous meetings. This has resonated throughout the state as a good idea. C, and by the way, A and B do not require that we change statute, don't require that we change administrative rule. C had to do with a timeline. So in statute right now, community colleges and universities are required to report to their boards by February 1st what their Achievement Compact recommendation is going to be. And then they report it to the OEIB June 30th. And that's in law. And honestly, I don't know why, and there probably were good reasons at the time. But in fact, it's a barrier for the post-secondary institutions, that February 1st deadline. And it doesn't, honestly, it doesn't fit tight loose really at all. We care, I think, at the OEIB that we get a regular report. June 30 seems to work with everyone. The February 1st requirement to report to a public board doesn't make much sense. And so our recommendation is that we change that in statute. And then D, there is an interest in analyzing how Achievement Compact work fits with, at the K-12 level, and I'm looking for Rob over there, he's not there, at the K-12 level, how it integrates and replaces or subsumes existing work that K-12 districts already do to report. And so Dr. Golden and Rob Saxton already are working on coordinated efforts to reduce reporting, and that could result in changes to statutes or rules. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that yet to present to you today, what exactly might change, but we have a commitment between OEIB and ODE regarding that change. And honestly, if there's anything at higher ed that the achievement compacts are duplicating. I don't think there is, but if there was, we have the same commitment to do that work with higher ed. Number 2 is the OEIB focus. We've provided that focus for K-12. We're going to let post-secondary continue to churn on the productivity metric. And as noted here, we're going to continue to focus on systemic work at the OEIB in our research group around equity, chronic absenteeism, poverty, and other issues that affect the whole system P through 20. Number 3, and this did come up from the field, so I want to be clear, 3A, what we're acknowledging here is that K-12 already has report cards, and those report cards already have taken on the Achievement Compact metrics, all of them except for one, and funneled them into the report card. So this does not mean a new K-12 report card. It means status quo on K-12 report cards. However, B is a call for the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission to work on institutional report cards. We are totally silent in our recommendation regarding what those look like. We don't have any preconceived notion they should look anything like K-12. All we've asked is that they incorporate the Achievement Compact metrics into whatever form that those look like. And then number 4 is brand new. And this came out of the very exciting, spirited discussion we had in August about parents and community members and their role on Achievement Compact committees. And if you'll remember at that meeting, we had some back and forth. We had some people trying to remember what the law was. Hilda called it up on the computer. We shared it. And what we've come to as an OEIB staff is a recommendation for next steps. First off, I want to be absolutely clear that neither in law nor statute is there anything at K-12, anything other than staff members who are part of the Achievement Compact Committee. There's a requirement to get community involved and parents involved. And there's a requirement that the district's going to report on how they get those folks involved. But there has never been a change in the idea that, in the law, that Achievement Compact committees are staff. Now, when we discuss this at length on K-12, and this is mainly those of us who have experience in this, is that honestly, our feeling is before we change statute around parent involvement, it's really important for us to look, and this is number A, or letter A, it's B, sorry. So doing B, then A. What are the existing K through 12 mechanisms that districts already engage parent and student input into the budget or the running of schools? We have site councils, we have school boards, we have budget committees, all of which have requirements in terms of who's present. And we did not think it was prudent to start changing the Achievement Compact constituent group until we looked at the existing groups and the data governance, especially around redundancy. As a school principal, I convene site councils every month. And I guess my question is, well, how do they relate to Achievement Compact committees? How does the budget committee relate? And until we could answer that question and present to this group a more comprehensive view based on research about that, we didn't feel it was ripe to suggest changes in how Achievement Compact committees were set up. And then finally, and then I'll take questions or comments, we do feel that it is the role of the OEIB immediately to engage with parents and community groups about the Achievement Compact metrics, state progress on those Achievement Compact metrics, and how we at the OEIB at a state level might change our strategies to get us to 40-40-20 by 2025. And whether that is community groups like we've engaged with already, or new mechanisms that we use, town halls or whatever, that we immediately get out to parents and get that input. So that we're not deaf to the concern that came up at the committee, but so that we don't immediately change what's going on in school districts without analysis. So it's really a two-part strategy, our engagement and then our study of what's going on with parent involvement at districts. Last thing I'll say is I want to note, at post-secondary, students are included on achievement compact committees by statute. So that is already included in the process. So I'll stop, and our goal is to call the question at some point and actually get approval to move forward on this. There are folks waiting with a high degree of interest out in the field for us to move forward on these recommendations.
And Peter, before we do that, what if we pass this today, what is the timeline for implementation?
Thank you very much. Well, we've been saying since the beginning, because where we sit right now is school districts are coming up with Achievement Compact recommendations with their boards and sending them to us on October the 15th. Higher ed just passed their thing. They've been turning theirs in. And I discussed this with Dr. Golden, 2 weeks ago, and where we landed, and we're happy for input on this, what we've been saying up until today is, if we change this today, it would go into effect next cycle. However, if there's a district out there among our 197 who would like to immediately adopt the new rules and follow on that starting immediately, we see no reason to not be flexible with those districts to focus in on third grade reading, focus in on 5-year completion right now. But we want to honor all of those who've done the tough work on the Achievement Compact committees and engaged with staff to do the work that they have done, that we would accept that. And it's good work. There's nothing in any way that's not good about that work. This is just a shift. So the answer is we would be flexible.
Just so everybody knows, in the school districts, you have to adopt the budget by a certain date, and it's in May or June. I can't really remember. I knew it when I was a superintendent, but
June 30.
And the way the achievement compacts are supposed to happen is your budget, you would present that to your budget committee before they adopted their budget. So they now have established goals, a 1-year goal for the following year. So we don't want, if someone prefers that, to interrupt that. But if they want to move to the new system, we welcome it.
But just to show you, I had a call today on the way up, literally from someone in a school district very close to here, who said we adopted our goal in May, we budgeted it, but we just got our assessment results, so we want to change it. Because they're looking at 1 year, and they don't want to miss that 1-year goal. So they had a strategic plan, but now they want to alter it because next year they want to be able to compare where they went. And I shared with this person a 3-year goal, and he said, oh my gosh, don't use my name, and don't say my school district, because I don't want it out there that we might want to be changing it, but please implore the folks around the table to make this change.
Mark, I move approval.
I second.
It's been moved and it's been seconded to approve the recommendation. Is there any discussion? Hannah?
I just have a question. So in A, on number 1, goal setting in 1 or 2 focus areas only, is that so they couldn't choose to do a third goal, or is it saying that we're only requiring 2?
Great question. And it says 1 or 2 because we have 2 at K-12 and 1 that we identified at post-secondary. I see no reason why, and then actually in the form right now, Hannah, there's a form that says local priorities.
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think those are really, really helpful and honor individual district work. But we were silent in the recommendations about taking them out or leaving it. So did you have a specific?
No, I just wanted to make sure if they wanted to set another goal, because that was important to their community, that they could still do that. That's
include the local priorities.
Not to supplant, but to include. I think it's perfect.
That's great.
It's great. Julia?
So a couple questions, observations, and then just a concern I have. So question, you said that there's one difference between the report card and the achievement compact. So what is that one?
Credits earned in high school, because college credits earned in high school, because the mechanism whereby that's sort of a brand new measure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the only one that's not on the report card right now.
So you're saying you dropped that on the achievement compacts?
No, we're not dropping anything on the Achievement Compact. We're going to continue to report to all of you about measures.
So you're just saying it's not a duplicative exercise because it's all the same?
Exactly.
Except for the one thing, okay.
Exactly.
And then,
thank you.
Just, you had attached the current Achievement Compact, and that's not changing, it's just how the goal setting is occurring. and the timing.
We did include in there a mock-up of what the new Achievement Compact form would look like. I think it's Appendix A. And actually it shows you, it's way earlier than that, Julie, and I can show you if you want, but if you go to the first,
But if you just know what the difference is.
it's shorter. It only has 2 goal areas. You have all the disaggregated groups that you're going to fill in, but just on 2 goal areas. It's on 1 page versus like 9 pages.
Okay. But so there's still a disaggregated
Yes,
component to it?
absolutely. All the disaggregated groups are identical.
For those 2 goals.
For those 2.
So just an observation on the parent piece, I would, instead of asking staff how parents are engaged in the Achievement Compact work, I would ask parents, because I think parents would provide a pretty different answer, because some of the things that you named actually don't have anything to do with the achievement.
Right.
Well, at least there doesn't seem to be any integration of parents into that, so I would think you'd want to ask parents how they would be engaged. And then,
Can I answer one thing about that? Our current administrative rule directs staff to report on that. And I think that's something that when Nancy was talking about getting out and talking to parents, that's part of the rationale is what we had in rule was that the districts would report. And that's sort of different than maybe going straight out.
well, I guess I would be concerned what again, that's districts reporting their perspective
Right.
of how they've engaged parents versus parents' engagement. I guess my bigger thing is I'm not supportive of just having the 5-year completion rate as the goal, because I don't think that's going to get us to our 40-40-20. Nancy and I had a conversation about this. I think it's too low of a goal, and it's not going to get us to where we need to do. I hate to lose the. It's not the 5-year piece, because I'm okay with that, but it's losing the 3 college level courses, because I think that's what's going to get the K-12 system to be looking at what's the target we're trying to hit, and the target isn't just the diploma, because that's just the 20, but it's the
Career and college ready.
career and college ready. So I raised this last meeting that I thought it was the wrong metric. It's the fine, to me, the fine base, but I would want to have an additive piece to that really gets our kids understanding that that's what they need to do in order to get to the other 80%.
So we did, and we've had some conversations about it. I do think it's a ripe proposal. I do also want to share, after following the work of accelerated learning, that the local conditions of students across our state vis-a-vis getting those credits are very, very different. And from where I sit, that metric, it's not available yet in so many, the differences, if that was the goal for next year or for the next 3-year goal, that's very different depending on where you sit across the state versus 5-year completion, which is within the scope of control maybe of the school district.
I guess I look at just the information that was provided around dual credits, AP and IB, and success in community college, technical school, the university system it seems pretty compelling that that's the right benchmark if we're going to say that's the trajectory we want kids on. And I totally agree that maybe there are some districts that aren't ready, but I think unless we set that, they're never going to move off of it.
So I think the Accelerated Learning Committee is going to help us with that a lot. I saw some good things from best practices. I mean, the truth is, because I've been around Oregon and particularly have spent some time in rural Oregon, there are communities that will tell you we don't have the connectivity and we don't have any university near us. So I think the work when you talked about, the technology and with accelerated learning where we are in there and that proposal, I know there's conversations about what do we do for the places that don't get access. So I think what I'm hearing Peter saying, and I agree with, is that the playing field is not even yet to make that the outcome, but it's not that we're not working on that. We're working on that through best practice committee, and we're also working on that through accelerated learning, which are on investment, are listed on the accelerated learning on an investment proposal, I mean the dual credit.
Samuel, have a comment?
Just a couple of quick ones. I seem to have a bad memory that when we developed our waiver for U.S. Department of Education, we said we were going to have one-year goals, or is that am I doing apples and oranges in terms of achievement compacts? And Rob might be my question to him, or what I'm getting at is that by saying we're going to 3-year goals, we may have a potential difficulty with that. I see Peter's going to answer that, so Rob, you don't have to breathe deeply.
So the waiver, does the waiver say anything? I thought it was a 1-year go-around evaluation. Does anything in the waiver interfere with a 3-year goal on the achievement compact?
I'm not aware that it does, but I haven't looked at it specifically for that purpose. I know it is around the evaluation piece.
And then looking at the law, you can see that when it was done, there was a suspension of some of the reporting that districts would do. Our intent for districts is they set the goal in year 1. Year 2, they have to affirm that that's still the goal. So there's going to be some affirmation. These are still our goals for Pleasant Hill School District, and we're moving forward. There will be that process of touch base to make sure that that's what they're still doing. So I think there still will be, by the letter of our Achievement Compact process, a report, but it's not going to be a wholesale rethink each year about what our goals are. It's going to be more affirmation that the 3-year goal they picked was correct.
Okay.
So I think that gets at the law that I saw.
I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
I really like the June report change. I think that's a really important piece. And I want to just tag on to what my colleague said when we have raised this in several spheres. And we talk about improving parent engagement. And maybe it's because I used to teach social studies, but I want to improve community engagement. And for many of our communities, that may be grandparents, aunts and uncles, a whole array. And I think we tend to keep this piece about it's just for people who have kids in the school. And I really want us to continue our thinking, and I know we raised this a couple of times, that it is not just about parents, it's about whole communities and their involvement, particularly K through 12, but also in higher education.
Yeah, so we put here that OEIB would engage with parent, community, and culturally specific groups, that we'll go out and talk to those groups to really find out what Julia was really emphasizing, which is that we have to talk specifically to them about the Achievement Compact, and does it achieve what they need to be achieved on behalf of their kids.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve this. We've had discussion. I want to take it to a vote. All in favor?
I just have one more question.
One more question.
Yeah. So we had talked about this new institutional report card for higher ed. Has there been a conversation with them about what that looks like? What, is it necessary? Do we have something that is already in place? I just don't want to create something if it's not necessary. So
I'm slightly at a loss. My understanding from Ben is not only it's a welcome request on their part and they're working on discussing it. There's nothing analogous to it already. And it's a discussion about what it might look like. The fear is that it would look anything like ODE's school report card. They want to have it be their own. But I don't want to speak for Ben, but my understanding is that there's ownership and interest in that from the HEC. But that's my understanding.
Okay.
Just a follow-up question on that. When it says the first prioritized goals for the post-secondary should be made in consultation with the HEC, when is the deadline for that happening? I feel like this is so focused on K-12, and it's sort of like you're just getting a complete pass, or there's a big hole.
Well, they're not getting a pass at all. They are working on a productivity metric, and it's been an ongoing source of discussion that I've been keeping track of as they've moved forward. I don't know what their deadline is, but it's intimately tied to this idea of productivity, which is part of their budget request coming into the biennium. And that's the metric that nationwide is the hot one, which is the productivity with underserved students. And it's the one that Ben has been, I feel like I'd really like to have him here in order to get a deadline. I don't know what that is. But what we're trying to do is fit in with an existing process that they've moved forward on already that's nearing completion.
All in favor?
Aye.
We do have a quorum beginning of the meeting. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So did you get that, Seth, as the count?
Did they give you votes?
I took that.
Maybe we'll have a hand.
Okay, let's go.
Roll call or a hand or some.
All in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay. Opposed? It's Julie. Okay. We had a quorum to begin the meeting, so we're fine. Okay. All right. Moving on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Peter.
You bet.
So moved.
It's been moved. Do we have a second? Okay, we've got a second from Julie. It's moved and second. Any discussion, consent agenda? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Is there anybody like?
Okay, hearing no opposition, it passes. Okay, moving on to agency update, Early Learning Division. Megan, welcome
Thank you.
to your new role. I have a little intro on you. Okay, and so we're just kind of a special day, and congratulations for you. So, Megan double majored in journalism and mass communications and political science at Arizona State. Wildcats, huh? No, Sun Devils. Sun Devils. She began her career as a journalist in Phoenix, focusing on issues related to children, families, and immigrants as part of a team. She's a two-time winner of the Payne Award for Ethics in Journalism and has also received multiple Arizona Press Club awards for her coverage of vulnerable children and families in the Phoenix metro area. Ms. Zerwin has also worked in education advocacy, overseeing community organizing and family engagement programs in 11 states. She's the proud daughter of 2 public school teachers, and welcome in your new role at the Early Learning Division.
Thanks so much. That's embarrassing, but thank you. I am really aware of time, and I'm going to cut what I plan to say short so that you can get to public testimony from folks who have waited patiently for hours. So I think Nancy asked me to share a little bit with you about what I'm excited about when it comes to the work of the Early Learning Division and the Early Learning Council, and then share the beginnings of my vision for where I think we're going next. And I say beginnings because while I've been on staff at the division for a year, I'm 3 weeks into this role and really doing kind of a stock take of where we're at and where I think we need to go next. So more concrete details to come in the future if you want them. But first, I'm really excited about this work because, as you can tell from my bio, I've dedicated my career so far to surfacing issues important to children and families, giving people who may not otherwise have a voice, space to have a voice, and as a former community organizer, just really believe in the power of communities to find their own answers with support from government, which is very much in line with the direction that we're going right now. I am convinced, as I know everybody at this table is, that providing access to early childhood education and services is absolutely foundational for us to achieve 40-40-20 in this state. And beyond that, I love the work of early learning because we have the privilege, which is somewhat rare in education, to focus on all parts of a child, from their family environment to the cognitive skills they're developing, like vocabulary, to the non-cognitive skills that we know are really important for future academic success. And it's just kind of cool to be part of a division that has the chance to focus on all parts of the child. In addition to that, I'm really excited about the vision that the governor and the Early Learning Council set forward as part of their design team, bringing our work into focus around the outcomes of making sure that children are ready for school, making sure that families are supported, and making sure that our system is aligned so that it better supports the needs of families. And I think we've made some good progress toward those goals. On the early end of the spectrum, the partnership that we've built with the Oregon Health Authority and that we're building between early learning hubs and coordinated care organizations is actually unique in the nation. I spend a lot of time talking to colleagues in other states, and people are blown away by the connection that we've been able to build between early learning services and healthcare. So I look forward to continuing that work. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made around aligning early childhood education with K-3. It's been great getting to be part of Rob's team. The Early Learning Division sees third grade reading as a key part of our work and know that we play a really important role in helping meet that goal. And I also personally think of early childhood education as a school improvement strategy and believe that if we're going to move the needle in the focus and priority schools that Rob's team is focusing on, we have to do a really good job on the early education side around helping children arrive at school ready to be there. And then finally, this work is still new for the Early Learning Division, but I am proud to say that we're doing our part to help out with the middle 40 in the 40-40-20 goal. Just last week, our division funded 67 scholarships for low-income women, all women, who provide childcare to go forward and complete their associate's degrees as childcare providers. And I'm looking forward to building out more of a connection to the community college system as we think about how we provide support for our workforce. Beyond the policy and the education pieces of our work, I'm completely inspired by and a true believer in the governor's vision for the role of the state vis-a-vis local communities. I think that the recognition that local communities are best equipped to solve complex challenges is really forward-thinking. At the same time, through being a big part of the implementation of early learning hubs in the last year, I think we've learned that this type of state to local partnership can be challenging. It can be intimidating for local communities to be told, here's some funding, here's an outcome, figure out how to do it. It can be hard for the state to let go of control. And it also, unless there's real attention paid to it, it's hard to get new voices and get the unusual suspects at the table. And so I'm looking forward to playing a leadership role in kind of tackling that next stage of challenges now that we've committed to this state to local community-based partnership model for early learning services. With that said, I just want to acknowledge that although the Early Learning Division has made good progress toward achieving the vision of the design team that they laid out a few years ago, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. I think we're at a really important point in implementation where we have to get into solving some of the nitty-gritty challenges that maybe we haven't had to take on yet. And I think that it's going to be a really interesting year as we explore how we do that. As a state agency, inside a larger state agency, the division is at a point where we have to look at how we marry the baseline operational work that we do, which is primarily licensing and regulating childcare, with the bigger, more strategic, more transformative work that we've been given to do by the Early Learning Council and the governor's office. And we need to look at a way that we do that and that addresses disparities in equity and inequities in our state. So it's kind of an unglamorous phase of implementation that we're in, but it's actually what I'm most personally attracted to. In the very short term, I will be focusing on bringing true implementation of the equity lens forward to every part of our work. Right now, we're doing a lot of listening to concerns that have been raised about some of our signature initiatives, including by members of this body, thank you. And we're taking a hard look at the data that we have around our systems, around our programs, around who we're serving, and asking ourselves tough questions about where we might need to address and adjust our strategies to better address equity in our early learning system. And then internally, we're also embarking on a strategic planning process to figure out how we bring all of the parts of state agencies that came together as the Early Learning Division a year ago more into alignment with one another. We moved the Office of Child Care and parts of ODE and parts of the former Commission on Children and Families together into the Early Learning Division, and then moved ourselves into the Department of Education. And there's just some work to do to bring that all into alignment with itself internally so that we can achieve our goals externally. My long-term vision is that we move from having an approach as a state agency that is predominantly a regulatory body to a state agency that is focused on cohesive and equitable outcomes at the systems level across the state, and an agency that's focused on service to the field. So we have 9 field offices across the state. I'd really like to see those field offices provide great regulation for childcare and high-quality supports to all of the community-based initiatives that we've started across the state. So we'll be doing some work to figure out what it really means to be regulators who are of service to outcomes. I'm looking forward to a strong partnership with this body and happy to come back at any time to talk in more detail about the work that we're carrying forward. Looking forward to partnering with all of you and want to encourage you, give me your feedback and be honest in it, because that's the only way that we're going to improve our work as we go forward. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Megan. Comments, questions for Megan? Thanks again and welcome aboard. Okay, we will move to our final agenda item today's meeting, and that's public testimony. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. This is a long one. Just a reminder, one speaker from each group. Each individual speaker or group spokesman will have 3 minutes. So we have a total of 8 individuals who have signed up. So we will start with, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of these are signatures. So John Niebergall from Sherwood, or Jim, excuse me, or John.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is John Niebergall. I teach at Sherwood High School, and I'm delivering a mobile fab lab this year around the state. Thank you for your time. I want to share a short video with you. It demonstrates best practice in CTE and how we are building an ecosystem in Oregon around collaboration with STEM, CTE, and dual credit programs. The first 20 seconds is a tech ed teacher who graduated from Oregon State University. Randy shares the need for revitalizing programs. In the first 3 minutes of this 10-minute video, and I only have 3 minutes, you will hear from students, industry representatives, and teacher partners that participated in this collaborative problem-solving project. There's supposed to be sound.
Here it comes. Come up a little bit.
Well, what he's talking about is how hard it is to come across qualified teachers in career and technical ed programs. There are a few hot spots, if you will, in the state of Oregon, but most of us are approaching 30 years or more experience. Here is
the use of computers and controlling tools to manufacture things. When we saw the ways that laser cutters, 3D printers, and CNC dial machines could be used to manufacture things, we recognized a good idea that we saw. Here is a way to do manufacturing without creating a new lab, and doesn't take anywhere near a specialized teacher or a facility. With just a regular classroom and a few relatively inexpensive tools, you can make a place where students manufacture things. This laboratory was created 2 years ago as a place for students to both design and create things. This lab with this tooling isn't so much industrial, it's a bit more educational. Nonetheless, they make real things and they solve real problems using this software and this tooling.
I'm Harry Hartzog. I go to Sitka High School and I'm in the Fab Lab program. So Tim comes to me, he has a basic sketch and I used Rhino to help take that and make it 3-dimensional and show all the moving parts and how they would work. And the idea is that you can strap the commodities to it, so during takeoff and landing of the aircraft, they won't shift.
I was really amazed how he took my basic idea, and converted it into this thing and looked at it in ways to make it better. We're talking about this college to career readiness. Yeah, John, I'm ready to hire this young man right
John,
now.
that's 2 minutes.
Yeah, the whole thing is 10.
The manufacturing industry is now
Is it about done? You read
I got 30 seconds.
on a screen in their office sends a file to a manufacturing plant. child who makes the product. This is the way manufacturing happens in the century. Sherwood High School and Sitka High School created a partnership to sort of simulate that. John Eberdahl and I created a project in which students worked in remote design careers.
Each school, depending on what kind of technology they had, they could make the part and then ship it to one school for.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Mary Whitmore. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. This is, I think, my 4th or 5th OEIB meeting over the last 3 years. I love these meetings. Just want you to know. I have a very brief statement and then a question. We agree the skill most fundamental to reading is associating sound and symbol. The KRA, Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, is the first measure of this school. The next measure occurs with the EZCBM in 1st grade, and I do not know what that stands for. If you compare the data from traditional students and explicit phonics students, let me back up. I want you to compare the data of these two figures from traditional students and explicit phonics students. And I want someone to tell me if there is not incontrovertible evidence of the superiority of explicit phonics, so I can do something else with my life before it's too late. That's my statement, and I'll give that to you. The question I have is about smarter balanced costs. I was trying to figure this out. 500,000 students, 6 assessment years, and I counted them, 1,593 Common Core State Standards, 3 assessments per year, and $27 per assessment. This came out to $388 billion, but you have to realize that's over 13 years. So if you divide that by 13 years, it's still $13 billion a year for our state. Where are we going to get that money? And if my figures are wrong, would someone who knows these matters, would you please enlighten me? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mary. Tamara Bush Johnson.
Yes,
Welcome.
thank you. Thank you. Tamara Bush Johnson, Executive Director of the Business Education Compact. Thank you so much for your patience, all your consideration, the many, many hours. And I love being in a room with so many passionate people about education because I can sense the passion in all of you and in the reports. 40-40-20 by 2025, I recognize that this goal is essential and so important to all of you. As it's critical, you also know that the governor's budget must be tightly aligned to initiatives that dramatically accelerate student achievement, as Nancy stated earlier in her comments. I am sure that you keep asking yourself, what's it going to take to ensure 100% of high school graduation of today's second graders? 40-40-20 is a bold vision. It requires bold action. It requires transformational change to classroom practices of teaching and learning that addresses root cause of high school dropout rates, low graduation rates, and lack of preparedness for college and career. Action has to be about speed and results. Incremental steps won't be fast enough. And for me, it's a burning platform because I hear of stories all the time, like the 2 students, Adam and Kat, that you heard today, that our schools are failing our students. There will be a little improvement without dramatic change for the delivery system. How many items, and so I know you are considering this, but I ask you to continue to consider how many items under consideration will dramatically and directly accelerate student achievement. How many items under consideration will dramatically change the classroom environment, the hub of learning? How many items under consideration will dramatically change the way schools and teachers support student learning? And how many items under consideration reflect the overwhelming and well-known research that says the biggest impact on student learning is a highly qualified and effective teacher? Oregon must move from a time-based system to a performance-based system. We must move from a school environment that is a system that is now system-focused to one that is student-centered and it's on performance. Currently, students move on without mastering all of our learning targets and our standards. We won't ever get to 40-40-20 until each student masters each standard. That requires radical change in how teachers teach and learn and how students learn. Imagine today's little second grader receiving her diploma in or before 2025. That diploma will truly, could be a predictor of success. And she will have mastered all learning standards. And she will be followed across that stage by all of her classmates, not just some. So imagine in Oregon when no child truly is left behind. So you have many considerations and recommendations in front of you. And you know that all cannot be funded, but keep asking yourself which ones will directly impact student achievement. I hope that you shoot your recommendation arrows at the heart of the problem, the current deficit in student learning, and the heart of the solution, the classroom teacher. Invest like businesses invest. They grow their employees because they know how important it is to be competitive. So I urge you to recommend proficiency-based teaching and learning best practices that will put Oregon on the sure path towards 40-40-20. And I have a copy of a report that was done. Some of you know Jill Kirk, formerly Vice President of the Oregon Business Council, and in 2008, they established, they had written many white papers, but there is one white paper that says taking promising practices to scale. And there are 3 items in here that I hope that I'm just going to leave these with you and so that you can take a look at. You already have one, Mark. You can pass one down there, and Nancy, I'll pass some your way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Okay, Toya Fick. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Toya Fick with Stand for Children. I'll be brief. I'm here today to testify in support of ODE's recommendations to amend the ELL funding formula that are a part of the Outcomes and Investments package that you all took a look at today. I want to thank ODE and Bob for his leadership for putting this on the table and for you all for considering it over the last few months. A couple of months ago, I reread the education funding team's recommendations around all the things that they thought that we should do to change investments in education. And one thing struck me about what they said about the ELL funding formula, and that was that we should provide a sense of urgency and a sense of focus on ELL kids. Our current funding formula does neither. There's no urgency, there's no focus on those students. And we believe that needs to change because if current trends continue, nearly 800 ELL kids will drop out of school this school year. Clearly, the way we're funding our programs needs to be amended and taken a look at, and we urge you that you will consider the proposal before you today to ensure that our students are a top priority as we move into the next legislative session. So we are happy to take any questions. I know I have to be brief today, but thank you so much again for considering these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Melvin Odemore. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Melvin Odenor. I too will try to be brief. I'm with the City Club Study Committee that worked on the GED last year, and I'm appearing this afternoon to say thank you for passing and approving the policy from the Equity and Partnerships Committee, and asking you to maintain that support as you move forward and looking at the outcomes and investments aspect of this, because one of the overriding aspect of the research report that the committee put together was for the state to come up with a strategic and funding plan to support the GED, and so you're on the path. stay the course, and I'll take any questions. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I have a stack of letters here that I'd like to leave. They're from individuals who graduated or individuals who received their GED and had great things to say about how important it is. I had more, but short of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Jeff Garner.
He wasn't able, he had to leave.
Okay. Brett Bingham. Might add, Brett is our Oregon Teacher of the Year.
Hi, Brett.
Hi, see you tomorrow.
Thank you for having me here today. It's my 173rd event as the Oregon State Teacher of the Year. Rob, thank you for tricking me into thinking I won a prize. I have to start today with a disclaimer. A few weeks ago, I made a complaint against my district, and
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Okay.
That doesn't hurry up. I don't know what does.
A few weeks ago, I filed a complaint against my district for their treatment of me, and I've asked for a bully complaint to be filed on behalf of my students, so they've given me a gag order. I'm not allowed to say I'm Teacher of the Year here today. I'm not allowed to wear my name tag. I'm not allowed to use my business cards. But hello, my name's Brett Bingham. I'm the 2014 Oregon State Teacher of the Year. This is my name tag. I have business cards here for anyone who would like to see them. I had the rare opportunity in July to meet with Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, and he was attending a conference I was at where I was speaking on a national panel. And a question was asked, and I was asked to answer it. How do we retain teachers who work with at-risk students? I gave him quite an earful, to say the least. And a few days later, I received an email saying, you need to watch this video. You had something to do with it. And it was Secretary Duncan's speech where he said they're going to put off tying teacher evaluations to student testing for a year. When he was interviewed by the New York Times, they asked him why, after all these years, he finally shifted his position. And he said, I was one of those reasons. So I was interviewed by the New York Times last week, and that'll be coming out sometime this week. But we do have an opportunity to put off tying evaluations, teacher evaluations to standardized testing. And as a special education teacher, I'll boil down my comments to him. I teach children who have a damaged brain. They will never, ever meet the goals of grade level testing on a standardized test, and yet I'll be evaluated by that. So it's a conversation I'd like to continue. I'm sure some of you have heard me say plenty about it. Thank you for your time today, and I will, Rob,
Your
I think we
conference
have to
is now
talk
over.
after
Goodbye.
this, so thank you very much. Business cards are here.
Okay, Joseph Santos Lyons. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Santos Lyons. I'm with the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, or APANO. I'm here in part to echo what Toya has shared around the urgency and the need to focus on the recommendations around ESL and the funding formula. And just to sort of highlight that this has been a long-standing concern for many of our communities, particularly immigrants and refugees who have had to experience the struggles of our ESL programs. And that this is deeply and widely felt in our communities, and that we've been continuing to organize across languages and cultures for many years. We're very excited about the work that ODE has done, both in terms of building some analysis and around the current data, around really bringing a value of equity to the table, and really wanting to address the needs of those who are most affected in the state. I just want to highlight some of our partners besides STAND. We're working closely with the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality, Adelante Mujeres in Washington County, the Coalition of Communities of Color, Chalkboard Project, and many other smaller organizations that really have members who are English language learners. So we really do hope that the experiences of these students and families can really be brought to the table, especially if there's any concerns. But we really feel like these recommendations are ready to go, and that it's time to begin to move these forward in the next session. We know it's a long process, and we're here to be partners with you. And so if you have any questions, please let Toya or I know. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes the sign up for the public testimony, and we are adjourned.